The First Civilization, a journey into the silent blue. Hello there, and welcome to Simply About Earth, where curiosity finds a gentle pace and science is allowed to wander without hurry. Tonight, we're going to take a long, steady drift into one of the most haunting questions humans have ever whispered to themselves. What if the very first civilization on our planet didn't disappear at all, but still exists right now, living not on land but beneath the ocean? It sounds like a story meant for myth or fantasy, but the more you let the idea rest in your mind, the more it begins to feel like a question worth taking seriously. Before we go any further, I'd like to ask you something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you close to the coast where the air sometimes tastes faintly of salt, or far inland, where the sea feels like a distant thought more than a daily presence? Take a moment to comment below and let me know. Are you watching this from a bustling city, a quiet suburb, or perhaps somewhere near the water? I'm curious about the places this video finds its way to, and there's something beautiful about knowing that people from all corners of the world might be contemplating the same mystery together. And when was the last time you stood by water and wondered what might be below its surface? We've all had that moment, whether staring into the dark of a lake or leaning over a pier, or even just watching waves gather and fall. There's a quiet sense of mystery in that hidden world, and it's easy to imagine that something older and more complicated than fish and currents could be waiting down there. If you find this kind of slow, unfolding journey comforting, I'd be grateful if you left a like or subscribed. It helps this small corner of calm find others who may need it. I promise nothing here is rushed, nothing is loud, and nothing will demand too much of you. Just ideas carried gently forward, like the tide. So let's begin, not with answers, but with questions. What if the first attempt at organized human life didn't rise on dry land, but in the shallow waters of a coast that was later swallowed by the sea? What if the descendants of those people didn't vanish when the water rose, but instead learned to adapt? When land-based cultures spread across deserts and plains, could there have been another path? One that slipped beneath the waves and never came back up? The thought is easier to entertain when you remember how little we really know about the ocean. Nearly 3/4 of the Earth is covered by it, and yet more than 80% of its floor remains unmapped, unobserved, unvisited. We have clearer images of Mars, a planet tens of millions of kilometers away, than we do of the ridges and valleys beneath our own waves. When something as close and constant as the ocean can remain so hidden, it's not unreasonable to wonder whether an entire history could be preserved down there, beyond our view. And humans have always suspected as much. Stories about sunken worlds are scattered through nearly every tradition. In Greece there was Atlantis, a place of great knowledge swallowed by the sea. In India, tales describe cities taken by the tide, their tops visible just below the surface on clear days. In the Pacific, many islands carry oral histories about lands that once stood above water, but are now far beneath it. Whether or not these stories come from actual memory of ancient floods, they show a consistent theme. The sea does not simply erase, it hides. Standing on a shoreline thousands of years ago, it must have felt like the ocean could keep any secret. Without diving gear, without cameras, without sonar, people could only guess what was beneath the surface. Occasionally, a storm would wash something unfamiliar ashore. A strange fish, a piece of coral, a shell shaped unlike anything seen before. And each object carried mystery. If life could take so many forms down there, who could say for sure that people themselves might not be among them? The logic behind civilizations rising on land is strong. Agriculture needs dry fields. Fire needs air. Tools are easier to forge in the open. But what if the very first organized groups of humans, or perhaps even something before humans as we know them, didn't accept that logic? Maybe they lived in a time when coastlines were different, when the sea rose quickly and forced adaptation. We know from archaeology that sea levels shifted dramatically at the end of the last ice age. Whole regions that were once dry plains are now drowned. Doggerland, a vast stretch between Britain and Europe, is one such place. In the Black Sea, evidence shows that a sudden flood may have expanded its boundaries within human memory. If people were there, they would have faced a choice: move inland or stay with the water. It's possible most moved. Our own history suggests that, but could some have found ways to stay? We already know that humans can hold their breath for astonishing lengths of time with training, and we also know that evolution favors survival. If small groups learn to fish deeper, to build shelters along submerged caves, to adapt slowly to conditions we would now call extreme, could that have been the beginning of a hidden continuity? And when you think of what civilization means, it isn't only about buildings or written language. It's about cooperation, organization, the passing of knowledge. Those things can exist in many forms. If an early group organized beneath the sea, perhaps using the natural architecture of coral reefs, kelp forests, or submerged ridges, we would not easily recognize it as a city. We'd expect stone walls and clear streets. But maybe their version of a settlement would blend so naturally with the environment that even if we stumbled across it, we might not know what we were seeing. This possibility grows sharper when you consider how the ocean limits our perspective. Below 200 meters, sunlight disappears. The deep sea is a world of darkness broken only by bioluminescence. Pressure increases rapidly, making exploration costly and difficult. Communication is tricky too, since radio waves fade quickly underwater. We've only managed to visit a fraction of that world with remote vehicles and submersibles. And even then, usually for short stretches of time, the rest remains hidden by sheer inaccessibility. The thought that an ancient civilization might still exist down there depends partly on that inaccessibility. It would explain why we haven't found evidence, why archaeology on land seems more complete, while underwater it feels like we've only scratched the surface. If they survived by integrating with the ocean, their technology wouldn't look like ours. It wouldn't produce the same ruins or artifacts. Perhaps it would leave almost no trace visible to us, except in the rare instance when storms or tectonic shifts brought something closer to the surface. Even if you don't believe in such a possibility, it's worth reflecting on why humans keep returning to it. We tell these stories again and again, not only because we fear loss, but because the ocean feels like an alternate history waiting just out of sight. It's a mirror that refuses to show its reflection until we find a way to look properly. And each time sonar maps reveal unexpected shapes or divers stumble on submerged structures, our imagination leaps to fill the gaps. Now imagine for a moment what life would be like for such a civilization. Light wouldn't be their guide, so perhaps sound would shape everything. Whales and dolphins already use echoes to build mental maps of their world. Maybe these people would too, sending clicks or hums through the water to sense their surroundings. Vision might evolve differently, or be supported by bioluminescent communication, like patterns flashing across skin the way squids and cuttlefish already do. Housing wouldn't rise upward like our cities, but instead extend along ridges anchored against currents reinforced by the natural strength of coral or volcanic stone. Food would be gathered not from fields but from schools of fish, shellfish beds, or the fertile ecosystems around hydrothermal vents. Energy might come from thermal gradients, from the chemical richness of the deep, or even from controlled use of buoyancy and currents. None of it would leave the stone remnants we rely on to trace history on land. It would all blend into the ocean, leaving us with nothing obvious to discover. But perhaps the most important question isn't whether they exist, but what it means for us to imagine they do. Because in that act of imagining, we admit that our story of humanity might not be the only one. It's humbling to think that while we've built satellites and skyscrapers, someone else might have chosen the opposite path, one of invisibility, patience, and silence under the sea. We may never meet them, but simply holding the possibility in mind reminds us how little of the world we've truly claimed. And if by chance they are there, watching from the deep, maybe they wonder about us in return. Land dwellers clinging to fragile strips of soil, building high but vulnerable, always fighting against rising seas, never quite comfortable with the element that covers most of our planet. To them we might seem reckless or temporary, while they in the hidden depths feel stable and eternal. And that thought doesn't have to be frightening. It can simply be part of the larger picture of life, one in which not all survival stories follow the same script. Whether or not they exist, the idea itself changes how we see the ocean. It is not just water, not just a resource, not just a mystery, but a possible home to something that might share more with us than we realize. And holding that thought steady prepares us to look more carefully at the stories we tell about what lives beneath the waves, stories that might carry pieces of truth we've overlooked. When people first began telling stories about the world, the ocean quickly became one of their most important characters. Before temples, before libraries, before written records, there were voices around fires and gatherings on shorelines, sharing memories that explained how things came to be. The sea wasn't only water, it was a boundary, a danger, a provider, and a mystery all at once. It swallowed land without warning. It returned gifts of food. It hid creatures of impossible size. When something held that much power, people had to weave meaning into it, and myths became the natural fabric of that meaning. The ocean is present in almost every creation story. In Mesopotamia, ancient texts describe primordial waters giving rise to both gods and chaos. In Egypt, the waters of Nile were said to exist before all else, out of which the first mound of creation rose. In Polynesian traditions, the sea is not background but kin, full of deities who guide and sometimes trick mortals. The Hebrew Bible begins with the Spirit moving across the waters, a sign that chaos and creation are inseparably tied to the deep. Again and again, water is the canvas on which beginnings are painted. If myths preserve fragments of memory, then perhaps these stories remember more than we usually admit. We know now that floods did happen. Ice melted at the end of the last glacial maximum, seas rose hundreds of feet, and coastlines changed dramatically. To people living through that time, it must have felt like the world itself was unraveling. Villages lost to waves, fertile land gone in a single generation, families displaced with nowhere to return. Those experiences would demand explanation, and explanation turned into story. But stories are rarely only explanation. They are also memory, coded in language and metaphor. Maybe when a people told of a city swallowed by the sea, they weren't just warning against arrogance or paying respect to gods. Maybe they were also recalling real neighbors who vanished when the tide rose. Perhaps they remembered structures visible beneath the water when the sun was right, or fragments of walls brought up in nets. In that way, myth becomes less like fantasy and more like a memory held in symbolic form, easier to pass down over centuries. Think about the legend of Atlantis. Most people know it as the archetype of a lost civilization beneath the ocean, but in its earliest version, recorded by Plato, it wasn't meant as a fairy tale. It was described as a real place, an island empire that fell to the sea in a single night. Whether Plato borrowed the story, invented it, or remembered echoes of older floods, the fact remains that the tale resonates because it matches a pattern humans recognize. Water takes, and when it does, it hides what it takes. And it isn't just Greece. In India, off the coast of Gujarat, sonar scans have revealed structures that some researchers believe could be remnants of an ancient city submerged thousands of years ago. In Japan near Yonaguni, divers found what looks like stepped pyramids and terraces beneath the waves. Debates rage about whether these are natural formations or evidence of human construction, but the fact that they inspire debate at all shows how ready we are to link submerged structures to old myths. We see stone shapes beneath the sea, and our first thought isn't erosion, but memory. In the Pacific, islands like Samoa, Tonga, and Hawaii hold rich traditions of gods and heroes traveling undersea. Some are said to have visited entire kingdoms below, with palaces made of coral and gates guarded by sea creatures. In Norse tradition, the sea was both a road and a threat, its depths home to the serpent Jörmungandr, so vast it encircled the world. In Mesoamerica, the Maya described the underworld as a watery place, full of rivers and lakes that souls had to cross. The consistency is striking. Water is a gate to another realm, sometimes hostile, sometimes protective, always mysterious. There is also a more personal element in these myths. The ocean was the setting for daily life. People fished in it, traveled on it, depended on it for survival. Every storm that took boats, every unexpected wave that erased shoreline homes, reinforced the idea that the sea was alive, unpredictable, and worthy of respect. If the sea could take lives, why not civilizations? And if it could hide one, why not many? These myths functioned as teaching tools as well. When elders told younger generations of gods below the waves or cities lost to pride, they weren't only passing down spiritual lessons, they were also encoding practical wisdom. Respect the sea, don't underestimate it, prepare for change. In that sense, myth was survival, but it was survival wrapped in images vivid enough to be remembered. Today, when we look at these stories with scientific eyes, we sometimes strip them of that dual role. We ask only, is it literally true? Instead of also asking, what memory or warning hides here? But if we allow both readings, myths become even more powerful. They may be fragments of ancient awareness that entire cultures once lived closer to the ocean than we do now, and perhaps some even tried to live within it. Consider the possibility that early observers actually saw evidence of something we've forgotten. Imagine a fisher casting nets and pulling up an artifact that didn't look like stone shaped by current, but something more deliberate. A carved figure, a tool, a shard of pottery, maybe even something unrecognizable. How would that be described without archaeology or science? It would become a story, and stories would grow as they were told and retold, until what began as a fragment became a myth of whole cities beneath the sea. And if we step back further, the ocean itself invites myth more than any other part of the world. Mountains are tall, but you can climb them. Deserts are vast, but you can cross them. The ocean, however, looks endless, and it hides everything below its surface. You can sail across it without ever knowing what lies beneath your boat. For early humans, that was an unbearable uncertainty. They needed a way to make sense of it, so they filled it with stories. And in some of those stories, civilizations thrived unseen. This is why even today, when science has given us submarines and sonar, we still find ourselves fascinated by the idea of underwater cities. Every documentary about the deep sea, every sonar anomaly, every diver who finds something unexpected, feels like an invitation to imagine. We may no longer believe in sea gods as our ancestors did, but we carry the same impulse. The ocean is too big and too hidden, not to inspire tales of what might be waiting. Myth also explains why the idea of an underwater civilization feels natural rather than absurd. If you tell someone about a hidden city in the clouds, they'll probably smile and move on. But tell them about a city beneath the sea, and they pause. They've heard that before. It feels familiar. It taps into something cultural, almost universal. Even if they don't believe it literally, the suggestion fits comfortably in the human imagination because myth has prepared us for it. So when we ask whether the first civilization might still be living beneath the water, we're not just making up a new idea. We're building on thousands of years of storytelling. We're asking a question that has already been asked, disguised as myth. And maybe that's why it feels like such a compelling path to follow. The ocean as a cradle of myths tells us as much about ourselves as it does about the sea. It shows how we respond to mystery, how we turn fear into narrative, how we preserve memories through symbols, but it also hints that sometimes stories can carry more than metaphor. Sometimes they can preserve pieces of truth, waiting for us to recognize them when we're ready. And if a civilization ever did survive beneath the waves, it's possible that the first clues we'd have are not artifacts or ruins, but the stories that have been with us all along. And from here, it feels natural to keep asking what kind of society those myths might have been describing, not as fantasy, but as a practical question. If a people truly lived beneath the sea, what would they look like? How would they survive? And how would they shape their world so differently from ours? When people talk about lost civilizations, they usually picture ruins buried in deserts, overgrown in jungles, or scattered across forgotten valleys. Those are the kinds of discoveries that make headlines. A temple unearthed, a city revealed after centuries of silence, a culture rediscovered through carvings and bones. But when you consider the possibility of a civilization under the sea, the word lost begins to feel less certain. Maybe it isn't lost at all. Maybe it's hidden, and the difference between those two ideas changes everything. To call something lost is to say it no longer exists. We use that word when a language disappears, when a structure crumbles, when a people are absorbed into others, until their distinct identity fades. It implies finality, a closing of the book. Hidden, on the other hand, suggests presence. It means something still exists, but it isn't visible to us. It can be overlooked, ignored, or simply out of reach, but it's still there. So when we talk about the first civilization possibly being underwater, we have to ask which word applies. Did it vanish, or has it simply been out of sight? Archaeology on land has given us enough surprises to stay cautious. Troy was once thought to be purely mythical, until ruins were identified that matched the descriptions. Machu Picchu was unknown to the outside world until less than 2 centuries ago. Entire networks of cities in the Amazon have only recently been detected with LiDAR technology, showing that human settlement there was far more complex than previously assumed. If these examples exist on land, where we have walked, built, and farmed for millennia, imagine what might remain undiscovered beneath thousands of feet of water. And it isn't just about the ocean hiding physical remains. Cultures can become hidden in more subtle ways. Oral traditions can be dismissed again, and eventually ignored until rediscovered generations later. Symbols can be misunderstood. Languages can hold clues that only make sense once you compare them to others. What looks lost might only be hidden in plain sight, waiting for context. So if an early civilization adapted to life underwater, its traces may not look like the ruins we expect. They may not be stone walls or metal tools, but something integrated with the environment, invisible to us because we aren't trained to see it. The ocean itself is excellent at keeping secrets. The same salt water that erodes ships and corrodes metal also preserves in other ways. Shipwrecks have remained intact for centuries when sealed away from oxygen and scavengers. Organic remains can linger far longer than they would on land. At the same time, the shifting of currents, tectonic activity, and the simple weight of water can bury or disguise any structure. This double effect, preservation and concealment, means that what lies below is not necessarily gone. It may be waiting, shielded from us by the very element that makes it hard to explore. Imagine for a moment what a hidden civilization could mean, not one erased from history, but one that chose a path we cannot easily follow. Maybe they withdrew as the seas rose, deciding that instead of abandoning the water, they would embrace it. Maybe they developed methods to breathe longer, to build differently, to shape their lives around currents and tides. If that choice was made thousands of years ago, they could still be there, existing alongside us, but unseen. The question then becomes, why haven't we found them? Some might argue that with sonar mapping, submersibles, and remote cameras, we would surely have encountered evidence. But consider how vast the ocean really is. More than 360 million square kilometers of surface, with depths averaging 4 kilometers, plunging down to trenches over 10 kilometers deep. Exploration is slow, expensive, and limited. Much of our ocean mapping is low resolution, designed to measure depth for navigation rather than to pick out details. If we can miss entire mountain ranges under the sea until recently, how easy would it be to miss evidence of a hidden culture, especially one that may not resemble our own architectural expectations? And then there's the possibility of intent. If such a civilization exists, hidden may not be an accident. It could be deliberate. Maybe they do not want to be seen, understanding that contact with land-based societies brings risk. History shows that when two cultures meet, especially when one is technologically dominant, the smaller often suffers. Perhaps they have chosen secrecy as survival. To us, that looks like absence, but from their perspective it may be protection. This brings up another layer of the question. If the first civilization is still there, do they know about us? Do they watch ships crossing above, satellites orbiting beyond, cities glowing on shorelines? Perhaps they know far more about us than we know about them. If they have remained hidden for millennia, it suggests not only survival but strategy, a decision to remain unseen even as the world above changed. Of course, skeptics will say that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and so far, no one has shown proof of an underwater civilization still alive today. But the absence of proof is not proof of absence. We cannot assume something does not exist simply because we haven't found it, especially in a domain as inaccessible as the deep ocean. History shows that what we call impossible often turns into discovery, once technology catches up. What's most striking is how the idea persists. Generation after generation, people return to the thought of underwater civilizations, not just Atlantis, but countless variations across cultures. Myths of sunken lands, gods beneath the waves, cities of coral and crystal. These aren't isolated stories. They form a global pattern, suggesting that humanity has always carried a suspicion that something is hidden down there. And even today, modern encounters feed that suspicion. Strange sonar readings, unidentified objects, tracked moving in ways we don't fully understand, structures glimpsed on seafloors that spark debate about whether they're natural or human-made. Most of these cases remain unresolved, and science demands caution. But each one adds fuel to the possibility that not everything is as empty as we assume. There's also the question of scale. We tend to imagine civilizations as vast empires, but they don't need to be. The first steps into organized life could have been small, compact, maybe even nomadic. If such a group learned to thrive underwater, their society might not look like sprawling cities. It could look like clusters of communities, adapted to their environment, that would make them even harder to detect. Think of how little we actually need to call something a civilization. Cooperation, shared knowledge, continuity across generations. Those qualities don't require skyscrapers or stone monuments. They require survival and memory. If a people beneath the sea have those, they qualify as much as we do, even if their technology and culture look nothing like ours. So when we ask whether they are lost or hidden, maybe the better question is how we define discovery. If they are there, they may not want to be discovered. If they are gone, their traces may still shape our myths, our fears, our imaginations. Either way, the ocean is not empty. It carries memory. It hides secrets, and it forces us to confront how little we truly know. And from this point, it becomes natural to consider what tools and ideas we use to listen to the sea, how we try to sense its language, and whether those attempts have already given us hints of something more. When we try to imagine what it would be like for a civilization to live underwater, one of the first questions that comes up is how they would communicate. We're so used to the idea of language as spoken sound that it's easy to forget how sound behaves differently in water. The ocean doesn't carry words the way air does. It bends them, muffles them, and stretches them across distances in ways that can feel both alien and surprisingly efficient. If we want to picture what life below the surface might look like, we first need to understand how water itself becomes part of language. The ocean is filled with voices already. Whales send songs that can travel hundreds of kilometers. Low-frequency calls so powerful that they pass through entire basins. Dolphins click and whistle in rapid bursts, bouncing sound off objects to create mental maps. Shrimp snap their claws so loudly in unison that entire stretches of coastline become a constant crackling chorus. Even fish hum, grunt, and drum. What seems to us like a quiet world is actually dense with messages. It's a kind of oceanic conversation that doesn't need words in the way we know them. Sound travels faster in water than in air, about 4 times faster, and it carries farther because water is denser. That means the ocean is naturally tuned for communication. If an early civilization adapted to life there, it would make sense for them to rely heavily on sound, but not necessarily in human speech form. Instead of vowels and consonants carried on breath, they might use pulses, hums, or patterns of rhythm. Language could be less about the exact shape of a word and more about the timing, tone, and duration of a signal. We've already seen hints of how this could work in our own species. Divers communicate through hand signals because speech is difficult, but free divers often describe the way the ocean itself feels like a conversation partner. The sound of waves above, the crack of distant ice, the calls of whales, all of these layer together into something that feels like a language you can sense more than translate. And when humans first invented instruments, many of them imitated water sounds, flutes mimicking currents, drums echoing waves. Perhaps the roots of our music come from listening to the sea. For an underwater society, communication might not even stop at sound. Light becomes scarce in the deep, but bioluminescence takes its place. Countless species glow, flash, or shimmer to signal one another. Squids change patterns on their skin with breathtaking speed, using color not just for camouflage but to send messages. If a civilization evolved alongside these cues, they might combine sound and light into a dual system. A pulse of vibration matched with a flicker of glow could carry layers of meaning far richer than our speech. This blending of senses could also explain why myths often describe undersea kingdoms as glowing, shimmering, or filled with strange music. Perhaps those stories remember the impression of bioluminescence and sound intertwined, passed down through encounters long forgotten. What humans described as songs of mermaids might have been the memory of complex communication that didn't fit into the categories of language they knew. Our attempts to listen to the ocean today often reveal mysteries we can't explain. Scientists record unidentified low-frequency sounds, some so powerful that they can be heard across entire oceans. One famous example is the bloop, a sound picked up in the late 1990s that initially baffled researchers. Later explanations suggested it was ice fracturing, but the fascination remained. People were drawn to the idea that maybe it was something alive, something massive, speaking in a frequency too deep for us to imagine. Whether or not the bloop was biological, it reminded us that the sea still speaks in voices we don't fully understand. And if it does, then perhaps we're overhearing fragments of communication not meant for us. Our microphones and hydrophones might have already brushed against signals from a hidden society without us realizing it. Communication underwater isn't only about survival. It's also about memory. Sound can be recorded, repeated, echoed. A civilization beneath the waves might pass down history through patterned vibrations, songs that hold generations of knowledge. Just as we once preserved our own traditions through oral storytelling before writing, they could do the same in acoustic form. Their libraries wouldn't be shelves of paper, but repertoires of sound, each rhythm a piece of collective memory. This idea isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. Many indigenous cultures on land still preserve knowledge through songlines, chants, and recitations. Those traditions show that memory encoded in rhythm and melody can survive for centuries. Underwater, where writing might not be practical, a sound-based system would make perfect sense. And if that sound were carried across long distances by water, entire communities could share it without needing to gather in one place. Consider also how tools might change the soundscape. We think of technology as mechanical, metallic, or digital, but underwater, it might be built to resonate. Structures could hum at specific frequencies, guiding people home like beacons. Currents passing through carved tunnels could produce tones that serve as markers. Objects designed not for visibility but for acoustics might be the foundation of their environment. To us, these would look like random rocks or ridges, but to them they would be instruments of survival and communication. And then there is the silence. The ocean can be unbearably loud in storms, yet in its depths, it can also be so quiet that the smallest sound feels magnified. Silence itself might be part of their language, pauses carrying meaning just as much as signals. Perhaps the absence of sound in a moment communicates caution, respect, or reverence. In that way, their culture could be shaped not only by what is said, but by what is left unsaid. We shouldn't forget touch either. Currents, pressure, and vibration can be felt as well as heard. Dolphins sometimes use direct contact, rubbing against one another as a form of social communication. Underwater people could expand this into a tactile language, using pressure or motion to signal meaning. Sound, light, and touch might merge into a complex multisensory communication system that we would struggle to interpret. And maybe that's why we haven't recognized them yet. If they speak in ways that don't match our assumptions, we wouldn't even know what to look for. A series of flashes or pulses could seem like nothing more than natural patterns to us. A sound could be dismissed as seismic activity. A vibration might be ignored as background noise. Only if we were trained to see it as intentional would it reveal itself as language. It's worth remembering that even with other species we know are intelligent, we still struggle to decode communication. Whale songs remain partly mysterious despite decades of study. Dolphin signals are only partly understood. Octopuses use colors and movements that we can describe, but not fully translate. If we can't yet speak with the animals we share this planet with openly, it's no surprise that a hidden civilization might remain unheard. Yet, there's another perspective to consider. Maybe they understand us. Ships, engines, drilling, all of these create noise pollution that fills the ocean. Our presence is loud, constant, and often disruptive. If there is anyone down there, they would have no trouble knowing we exist. The question is whether they interpret our noise as communication, chaos, or threat. In that sense, the ocean's language isn't only theirs, it's also ours, projected unintentionally through everything we do. We've made the sea louder than it has ever been, and perhaps we've been speaking without realizing it. If they are there, perhaps they already listen to us more closely than we've ever listened to them. The idea that the ocean itself carries language is powerful. It means that to seek an underwater civilization isn't only to look for structures or artifacts, it's to listen differently, to pay attention to rhythms and patterns that might already be brushing past us. It means learning to treat sound as archive, as architecture, as map. And once you begin thinking that way, the ocean becomes less of an empty silence and more of a conversation we've only just started to notice. And that naturally leads us to wonder about the stories we've told of encounters with strange voices beneath the sea, stories that may not be mere fantasy, but echoes of something we once brushed against without recognizing. When we look back at the stories passed down from ancient cultures, we find a surprising number that describe not just water, but whole worlds beneath it. These aren't casual mentions or small details tucked into myths. They are central, recurring themes that suggest generations of people believed something significant was hidden below the surface. And while it's easy to dismiss them as metaphor or exaggeration, it's harder to ignore the way they appear across continents, across languages, and across eras that had no contact with each other. Take the flood stories, for example. Nearly every culture has one. In Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh learns of a great flood that wiped out humanity, except for one survivor who built a boat. In the Hebrew tradition, Noah's Ark preserved life while waters covered the earth. In India, Manu is warned by a fish about rising waters and survives to restart civilization. In indigenous traditions across the Americas, floods play similar roles, washing away whole worlds before new ones begin. While these are often interpreted as morality tales or reflections of natural disasters, they also suggest a collective memory of rising seas, swallowing homes and lands. Now imagine you were part of a culture that lived near the coast during one of those events. As the sea took fields, villages, and forests, you would not only tell the story of survival, you would tell the story of what disappeared. And in retelling it, Perhaps you would wonder whether those who didn't escape continued in some other form, beneath the waters. It would be natural to imagine them not as erased, but transformed, living in a hidden world below. This transformation theme shows up again and again. Greek mythology gives us Nereids, nymphs who live in palaces under the waves, each with distinct personalities and roles. The god Poseidon rules the depths from a grand hall built of coral and gems. In Hawaiian tradition, mo'o are water spirits tied to ponds, rivers, and the sea, often described as shapeshifters who can live both above and below. In Japan, the legend of Urashima Taro tells of a fisherman who visits the dragon palace beneath the ocean, a place where time moves differently. When he returns, centuries have passed. It's tempting to dismiss these as symbolic, but when cultures half a world apart describe palaces beneath the sea, glowing cities and beings who live comfortably there, it suggests something more than coincidence. Perhaps they are cultural echoes of encounters with things that look like structures, lights, or people below the surface. Maybe the stories grew around real observations that couldn't be explained with the knowledge of the time. And the details are striking. Many of these tales describe materials that glow or shimmer. The dragon palace is filled with brilliance. The halls of Poseidon sparkle. The underwater worlds of Pacific traditions are lit by corals or pearls. To ancient people, this would be a natural way to describe bioluminescence, fish that emit light, corals that glow, organisms that shimmer in the dark. These would create the impression of a city illuminated from within. Told through myth, they become palaces and jewels, but the root image may come from real encounters with luminous life beneath the waves. Time distortion also appears often. In the Japanese story, hours below equals centuries above. In Celtic legends of Tir na Nog, the land under the waves, time also moves differently. In Greek accounts of undersea visits, mortals often return confused about how much time has passed. This could be symbolic, of course, but it could also reflect the genuine disorientation of being in an environment without sun or moon, where the normal markers of time vanish. For people whose entire lives depended on the rhythm of day and night, entering a space where those rhythms were absent would have felt like stepping outside of time itself. And then there are the stories of human contact. Fishermen pulled below the waves, travelers invited into banquet halls, heroes who marry daughters of sea gods. These aren't just metaphors for death or imagination. They're structured as encounters with dialogue, exchange, and consequence. The sea isn't presented as empty, it's presented as inhabited. Consider too the archaeological hints that align with these myths. Off the coast of India near Dwarka, divers have found submerged structures that resemble city walls and temples. Carbon dating of materials suggests they could be thousands of years old, older than many known urban centers on land. In Japan at Yonaguni, the massive underwater formations look so much like terraces and steps that debates still rage about whether they are natural or human-made. In the Mediterranean, fragments of stone roads and columns have been found in places now deep underwater. Each discovery reinforces the idea that human settlement once existed where seas now rule. What if myths are not just stories, but cultural memory of these very events? Imagine a coastal city gradually overtaken by water. The first generation warns the next. The second warns the third. By the 10th generation, the story has transformed into a myth about gods taking the city below. But the kernel of truth remains. People once lived there, and something of them may still. It's also worth thinking about how ancient people interacted with the sea in ways we often underestimate. Today, we treat diving as recreation or specialized research, but pearl divers, sponge divers, and fishers in many cultures could stay underwater for minutes at a time, generation after generation. Some indigenous groups have adaptations that allow for longer breath holding and greater tolerance to pressure. If you imagine those abilities pushed further, perhaps supported by gradual environmental changes, the idea of people adapting more fully to the ocean begins to feel less impossible. In myths, these divers often become transformed beings, half human, half other, mermaids, selkies, sirens. naga, moa, all of them are human-like, but adapted for water. Skeptics say these are just symbolic creatures, but they could also be cultural memories of people who lived closer to the water than we do now, perhaps even people who chose to remain in it longer than land-based cultures thought possible. And if such people existed, even in small numbers, the ocean itself could have hidden them over time. Storms, rising seas, shifting coasts, all of it could erase their traces on land, but beneath the water they could continue, remembered in myths as half human, half legend. The universality of these myths is what makes them hard to dismiss. We're not talking about one isolated story. We're talking about a pattern so consistent it appears across the globe. Undersea palaces, glowing cities, transformed beings, time distortion, human contact. Cultures separated by oceans described the same motifs. Either humanity collectively invented the same symbols, or they were all responding to real experiences. And if they were real experiences, the simplest explanation is that something was actually there. Today, when we revisit these stories, we often filter them through modern eyes. We want proof, artifacts, photos, but myths are a kind of proof too, not of exact details, but of persistent memory. They show what mattered enough to be told again and again. If entire civilizations were lost beneath the waves, these stories might be the only surviving evidence. So when we think about a first civilization still alive underwater, these myths are more than background decoration. They're the starting point. They suggest that humans have always suspected we are not the only organized beings on this planet, that maybe someone else took a different path and chose the depths instead of the land. And if that's the case, then perhaps listening more carefully to these ancient stories could help us. Instead of dismissing them as fantasy, we might treat them as maps, not of geography, but of memory. Maps pointing below the surface, urging us to look where we usually don't, and reminding us that our ancestors may have known more about the ocean's secrets than we allow ourselves to believe. And from here it feels natural to wonder why we dream so often of cities beneath the sea, why this image stays with us even in modern times, appearing in books, films, and art, as if it were a memory resurfacing rather than an invention. There's a reason the idea of an underwater city keeps appearing in human imagination. Even when myths fade, the image remains. Artists paint it. Writers describe it. Filmmakers build whole worlds around it. When you think of Atlantis, you're not picturing ruins scattered on the seabed. You're picturing glowing towers, streets of coral, domes that keep out the water, and people moving gracefully where we could barely survive. Something about that vision pulls at us. It's worth asking why. Part of it comes from the way the sea feels unfinished to us. We've mapped continents, charted skies, even put rovers on Mars, but the ocean is still mostly unknown. It's a frontier we live beside every day without claiming to understand. Cities beneath the sea give form to that unknown. They take the mystery and shape it into something we can imagine. A reminder that the dark isn't empty, it's simply hidden. There's also the psychological pull of reversal. On land, our cities dominate. They rise above ground, tall enough to be seen from miles away, glowing at night, as if to declare that we've mastered the surface. Underwater, we can't replicate that in reality, so we build it in our minds. The thought of a city beneath the waves flips the usual hierarchy. It suggests that maybe we're not the masters after all, that someone else could be thriving in the element we can only borrow for minutes at a time. And then there's the appeal of contrast. Our world is noisy, bright, crowded. The sea in our imagination is quiet, shadowed, expansive. Dreaming of underwater cities is like dreaming of balance. They become symbols of harmony, of life built not in defiance of nature, but woven into it. Streets blending with coral reefs, lights glowing softly like jellyfish, communities moving with the current instead of against it. Whether such a vision is realistic doesn't matter as much as the fact that it speaks to something we feel missing in our own cities. Science fiction and fantasy have taken these ideas and given them endless variations. In stories, undersea societies are sometimes utopias where people live peacefully in tune with their environment. Other times they're dystopias, filled with secrets, guarded against outsiders, holding grudges against the surface. Both versions reflect our own anxieties. The utopian image shows our longing for a better way to live. The darker version shows our fear that if such a people exist, they might judge us harshly for what we've done to the planet. It isn't just modern fiction that shows this. Ancient art often hinted at similar dreams. Mosaics from Greece and Rome depicted sea gods with elaborate underwater halls. Carvings in Asia showed dragons ruling beneath rivers and seas. Oral traditions described banquets in hidden palaces below. These weren't casual decorative images. They were detailed, repeated, and culturally important. They suggest that entire societies once spent time picturing what life would look like beneath the waves. The dream persists because water itself invites it. When you swim just below the surface and look up, you see light refracted, buildings and trees distorted, the world above transformed into a shifting mirage. Even shallow dives feel like entering another reality. If you've ever snorkeled over coral reefs, you know how easily the mind slips into the idea of a city. Fish move like crowds, coral rises like towers, tunnels and arches form natural avenues. It doesn't take much imagination to see a settlement there. Dreaming of underwater cities is also about our fascination with what we can't control. The ocean humbles us. Storms sink ships. Waves reshape coasts. Tides arrive without asking. Imagining a people who not only survive but thrive in that environment is like imagining mastery over something we fear. It's a way of making the uncontrollable feel less threatening. If they can do it, maybe it's possible. Maybe the sea isn't only danger, but also home. Psychologists sometimes argue that we dream of hidden societies because we project our own desires onto them. When we're dissatisfied with the way things are, we imagine someone else has found a better way. The underwater city becomes a mirror for our hopes. We picture them as wiser, calmer, more advanced, because we want to believe such a path exists. At the same time, we also fear they might be stronger, harsher, less forgiving. Both versions tell us more about ourselves than about them. But maybe there's more than psychology at play. Maybe the dream comes from faint cultural memory, passed down through myths and stories of times when people really did live closer to the water. Maybe it's not just imagination, but a remnant of something once real. Human brains are good at holding fragments of memory across generations in the form of story. What begins as history slowly becomes legend, then myth, then dream. The persistence of underwater cities in our imagination might be evidence of that long memory refusing to fade completely. There's another angle too. Cities beneath the sea represent a kind of boundary crossing. They remind us that life isn't limited to what we know. We look at the ocean and think of it as unlivable, but our dreams insist otherwise. They whisper that maybe the limits aren't as fixed as we believe. That thought is both unsettling and comforting. Unsettling because it challenges our place as the dominant species. Comforting because it suggests resilience, the possibility that life finds a way even in places we can't. Art often reveals how deep this fascination runs. Painters have filled canvases with visions of glowing domes beneath the sea. Filmmakers create whole franchises around civilizations like Atlantis. Writers return again and again to the image of coral palaces and forgotten cities. Even video games let players wander through imagined ruins or thriving undersea worlds. The repetition matters. It means we keep needing to see it, to test the image against our imagination, to remind ourselves of what might be possible. And when you look at how children respond to the idea, it becomes even clearer. Ask a child to imagine mermaids or hidden kingdoms, and they'll accept it easily. The sea already feels magical to them, filled with creatures stranger than any fairy tale. Glowing jellyfish, enormous whales, fish that look like living rainbows. Adding cities to that mix feels natural, not extraordinary. Perhaps that openness shows how deeply rooted the dream is. It doesn't take convincing. It feels obvious. In some ways, dreaming of underwater cities is also dreaming of escape. Modern life often feels heavy, rushed, and confined. The ocean promises space, calm, and a different rhythm. Picturing a society beneath the sea is a way of imagining a fresh start. No cars, no crowded streets, no noise from machines, just a community shaped by currents and silence. Whether or not that's realistic isn't the point. The dream itself offers relief, but there's also caution in these dreams. Not all visions of undersea societies are welcoming. Sometimes they're depicted as hostile, as guardians of the deep who resent intrusions. In these versions, the dream becomes a warning. Respect the ocean, because if you don't, those who live there may remind you of your limits. This matches the ancient pattern of myths where gods of the sea demanded offerings or punished arrogance. Even today, our stories keep that duality alive. The underwater city is either sanctuary or threat, depending on how we treat the sea. The persistence of this imagery suggests it isn't going away. Even as we learn more about the ocean, even as science replaces mystery with data, we'll likely keep dreaming of cities beneath the waves. Because the dream isn't only about the ocean, it's about us. It's about the human need to imagine other ways of living, other possibilities for survival, other communities that reflect our hopes and fears. The ocean just happens to be the perfect canvas for it. And if you follow that thought further, it naturally leads to the practical side of the question. If we dream of these cities so persistently, what would it actually take for them to exist? Not in fantasy, but in physical reality. What challenges would need to be overcome? And what would life look like in the silent blue depths? When people talk about frontiers, they often picture mountains that haven't been climbed, deserts that haven't been crossed, or distant planets waiting for exploration. But the truth is, the greatest frontier left to us isn't far away in space. It's right here at home, pressing against every coastline, surrounding every continent, hiding just below the waves. The deep sea is our planet's most expansive, least understood region, and for all our advances in science and technology, it remains largely unknown. We like to think of Earth as familiar. Maps make it look conquered. Satellites give us images of every mountain and valley. Airplanes let us cross continents in hours. But maps are misleading when it comes to the sea. The blue areas look smooth and blank, as if nothing exists there but water. In reality, the ocean floor is full of mountains taller than Everest, trenches deeper than anything on land, ridges that stretch farther than any highway we've ever built. It's a landscape more dramatic than any we've seen, and yet we've barely begun to study it. Explorers in the 19th century estimated the ocean's depth by lowering weighted ropes over the side of ships. Even then, they found drops so extreme they couldn't measure them with the tools they had. Today we use sonar and satellites, but even those give us only rough outlines. Imagine trying to understand a mountain range by running your fingers across a blanket draped over it. That's how our maps of the ocean floor look. We can guess the shape, but the details are still hidden. The sheer scale of the deep sea is part of the reason we know so little. It covers more than 2/3 of the planet, with average depths around 4 kilometers and trenches that go down more than 10. If you drained the oceans, you would see a landscape so vast and rugged, it would dwarf everything we know on land. Exploring all of it would take centuries, even with the best machines. And yet, for all its inaccessibility, the deep sea isn't empty. It's bursting with life, in forms we're only starting to understand. Entire ecosystems thrive around hydrothermal vents, where superheated water gushes from the Earth's crust. Strange creatures glow in the darkness, using light to hunt, attract mates, or confuse predators. Some animals survive pressures that would crush submarines. Others live for centuries, growing slowly in the cold. Each discovery reminds us that our assumptions about what's possible are often wrong. This is why calling the deep sea Earth's final frontier feels so accurate. It isn't just unexplored space, it's a reminder that mystery still exists here, that we don't need to look to Mars or Europa to find the unknown. It's waiting in our own backyard, beneath the surface of the water we pass by every day. But here's where the question of a hidden civilization becomes sharper. If the deep sea can hide mountains, trenches, and entire ecosystems from us, what else could it be hiding? If organisms thrive in total darkness under crushing pressure, why couldn't something more complex survive there too? The fact that we struggle to reach these depths doesn't mean they're uninhabitable, only that they're uninhabitable for us. Other beings might have adapted in ways we can't imagine. People often compare ocean exploration to space exploration, and the comparison works both ways. Space is vast, hostile, and expensive to reach. So is the deep sea. Both require technology to survive even briefly. Both spark imagination about what kinds of life might exist. But the difference is distance. The deep sea isn't millions of kilometers away. It's right here, under our feet. If there is another civilization out there, the odds are higher that it's beneath our oceans than on another planet. The technological challenges are enormous, but they also explain why so much remains hidden. Pressure increases by 1 atmosphere every 10 meters. By the time you're at 1,000 meters, the force is like 100 elephants pressing on every square meter of surface. Human bodies can't withstand that. Even submarines need careful engineering. Most can't go beyond a few thousand meters. Only a handful of vessels have reached the deepest points, and they've spent only minutes or hours there. Compared to centuries of exploration on land, our time in the deep sea is a blink. And yet, every time we do look, we find something new. Entire species discovered with each dive, landscapes that look like alien planets, features we didn't know existed. That alone suggests we've only scratched the surface. It also reminds us how arrogant it is to assume we already know what's there. The deep sea also resists easy categorization. On land, ecosystems are bounded, forests, deserts, tundra, each with clear borders. Underwater, it's more fluid. Currents mix. Temperatures shift suddenly. Pressure changes with depth. It's a dynamic environment where adaptation is constant. A civilization built there would have to be just as dynamic, just as fluid. That makes it harder for us to recognize. We're looking for permanence, for structures that last. Maybe they've built in ways that blend so seamlessly with their environment, we mistake them for nature itself. The frontier nature of the deep sea also explains why we dream about it so much. It's one of the last places we can project mystery onto. It represents the unknown in a world that often feels overmapped and overexplored. When we imagine cities beneath the sea, we're also imagining that the frontier hasn't closed. That wonder still exists. Scientists sometimes say that if we found evidence of life on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons with a subsurface ocean, it would be the discovery of the century. But if we found evidence of a civilization in our own oceans, it would be far more shocking, because it would mean we've never been alone on Earth, that our story has always had a parallel thread running beneath us, hidden in the depths. Thinking about the deep sea this way shifts the question from, is it possible, to why not? Why shouldn't life organize itself differently in places we can't reach? If evolution has shown us anything, it's that adaptability finds ways. And if organisms can live at hydrothermal vents, drawing energy from chemicals instead of sunlight, why couldn't something intelligent build a life around that too? What makes the deep sea the final frontier isn't just its size or its mystery, it's the possibility it holds. It's the reminder that the world isn't finished, that we don't know everything, and that maybe we share this planet with more than we think. And if that's true, then the next step is to imagine what it would actually take to survive there. How could a people breathe, build, and live under conditions we find impossible? What adaptations or technologies would make that life not just survivable, but sustainable? The most immediate challenge to living underwater is the simplest one to name and the hardest to solve. We can't breathe there. Human lungs are built for air, not for pulling oxygen from water. We can hold our breath. We can use tanks and suits, but the ocean is not our element. So if we imagine a civilization that has lived there for thousands of years, we have to ask how they solve that problem. Did they change biologically, or did they invent technology that let them stay beneath the surface? Biology already gives us hints of what's possible. Fish breathe by pulling water across gills, delicate structures that separate oxygen from the liquid. Whales and dolphins, mammals like us, return to the surface for air, but they've developed systems to store and use oxygen more efficiently. Seals can slow their heart rates, redirecting blood flow to conserve resources during deep dives. Humans themselves have a mammalian dive reflex, a set of automatic changes that occur when our faces touch water, slowing our heart, conserving oxygen, and shifting blood to protect organs from pressure. It's faint compared to whales, but it's there. In some human groups, adaptation has gone further. The Bajau people of Southeast Asia, often called sea nomads, spend much of their lives diving for food. Studies have shown that their spleens are larger than average, allowing them to store more oxygen in their blood. They can stay underwater longer than most people, sometimes several minutes at a time, with little or no equipment. That adaptation developed in only a few thousand years. Given longer, what else might be possible? Evolution doesn't need miracles. It needs time, pressure, and survival. If a group of humans or human-like ancestors chose to stay close to the sea as it rose, if they spent generation after generation diving, hunting, and building there, their bodies could have changed. Larger spleens, more efficient blood chemistry, maybe even primitive gill-like adaptations that allowed them to draw limited oxygen from water. It wouldn't happen overnight, but across millennia, survival pressures could push biology in that direction. Of course, biology might not have been enough. Maybe they used technology instead. When we think of technology, we picture metal, wires, engines, things that corrode in salt water, but technology doesn't have to look like ours. It can be simple, natural, even organic. Perhaps they learned to use air pockets in caves, or to trap air in woven structures that let them stay submerged longer. Maybe they domesticated sea plants that release oxygen, creating natural reservoirs of breathable air. Even today, engineers experiment with artificial gills, devices that try to pull oxygen from water directly. If we're attempting it now, maybe others solved it long before. Another possibility is a blend of both, biology and technology working together. We already rely on tools to extend our biology: glasses for sight, clothing for warmth, medicine for survival. An underwater civilization could have developed in the same way, using their natural adaptations but supplementing them with crafted aids. Shells shaped into breathing tools, coral structures grown to hold air, symbiotic relationships with organisms that help filter oxygen. None of it needs to look like our machines, but it could be just as effective. It's also worth considering that their concept of breathing might not match ours at all. We think of it as inhaling and exhaling air. But what if they found a way to slow metabolism, to reduce oxygen needs to a fraction of what ours are? Some animals already do this. Turtles can hibernate underwater for months, surviving on very little oxygen. Certain fish slow their systems almost to a stop in cold conditions. Even in humans, trained free divers can push their bodies to astonishing extremes, slowing everything down to stretch each breath. A society that lived underwater might have learned to treat breath not as constant, but as precious, conserving it until the next opportunity. If they live in deeper regions, pressure itself changes the equation. Oxygen behaves differently under those conditions, and so do bodies. What kills us might not kill them if they've adapted to it. Perhaps they don't rely on air the way we do at all. Perhaps their entire chemistry shifted over time, drawing energy from sources we don't even consider. And if we imagine them as descendants of humans, the question becomes even sharper. Did they leave us behind, taking a different path when the seas rose? Or are they something older, a branch of life that split off before we even arrived? developing underwater while we developed on land. In that case, their solutions might be even more foreign to us. Not lungs modified, but entirely different systems, forms of respiration we can't easily compare. Technology too invites speculation. When we picture underwater technology, we tend to think of submarines and domes, but those are our solutions, built from our perspective. Underwater technology might look like biology itself. Coral can be shaped, grown into structures. Kelp can be woven into strong, flexible walls. Shells and bones can form durable tools, and some sea organisms naturally produce oxygen bubbles. If such resources were cultivated, breathing underwater might be less about machines and more about ecosystems designed to sustain life. We often forget that our own history is full of simple but ingenious solutions. Before engines, people used sails. Before electric lights, they used fireflies in jars or polished stones to reflect sunlight. If we project that same kind of resourcefulness into the sea, it's not hard to imagine ways an early people could extend their time underwater until adaptation took care of the rest. And maybe that's why myths so often describe underwater beings as hybrids, half human, half something else. Mermaids with gills and lungs, naga with serpentine bodies, selkies who shed their skins to walk on land. These images might not be pure invention. They could be cultural attempts to describe people who lived in both worlds, able to breathe air, but more at home in water, sustained by systems we no longer share. Another angle is to think about how we ourselves might adapt if forced. Climate change, rising seas and shifting coastlines could push us toward underwater living in the future. Already, architects design concepts for floating or submerged cities. If we ever attempt that, we'll face the same question: biology or technology? Do we modify ourselves with genetic engineering, or do we rely on machines? The answer may well be both. Perhaps the people we imagine already answered it long ago, choosing a hybrid path of adaptation and invention. It's fascinating to think about how such a society would view breath itself. For us, it's automatic. We rarely think about it unless it's interrupted. For them, it might be sacred, a resource to be managed carefully, respected, even ritualized. Entire cultural practices could grow around the rhythm of breath and pause around the transition between water and air. Language, art, and belief might all be tied to the act of breathing differently than ours are. And in that sense, the line between biology and technology might not even matter. If the result is survival, if the result is continuity, the method becomes less important than the outcome. We separate the two because of how we live. But in a civilization shaped by the ocean, the categories could blur until they're meaningless. Thinking this way opens the door to more possibilities. Maybe the real difference isn't how they breathe, but how they think about living altogether. If oxygen is scarce, then life is slower, calmer, less frantic. Decisions are deliberate. Movement is careful. In an environment where rushing wastes oxygen and energy, slowness becomes survival. So to them we might appear frantic, burning through moments like fire, while they move steadily, conserving. What looks to us like silence might to them be wisdom. And once we accept that survival underwater is possible, through biology, technology, or both, the next question becomes how such a society would grow. How would they build? How would they organize? How would they shape a world not above the waves, but beneath them? The word Atlantis has become so woven into our language that it hardly feels like myth anymore. It's shorthand for any lost civilization, a symbol for hidden knowledge, a convenient metaphor whenever we want to talk about something powerful that slipped away. Yet when Plato first wrote about it, he wasn't writing a fantasy story. He described it as history, a tale passed down through generations about a real place that flourished, then sank beneath the sea. Plato set the scene with care. He wrote that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was described as an island larger than Libya and Asia combined, with advanced architecture, organized government, and a navy strong enough to challenge Greece itself. In his account, the city grew arrogant, angered the gods, and was swallowed by the ocean in a single day and night. Historians have argued for centuries about whether Plato invented the story as allegory or whether he was recording something he believed to be true. Some say he used it as a political lesson, a warning against hubris. Others suggest he was recalling older tales of floods and vanished lands, shaping them into philosophy. But the fact that the story resonates across millennia shows how powerful the idea already was. It didn't matter whether Atlantis was real in the strict sense. People believed it could be, and they kept retelling it. From that point on, echoes of Atlantis began to multiply. Medieval maps placed it in the Atlantic Ocean. Explorers searched for it in the Caribbean. Mystics claimed it was a source of hidden wisdom. In the 19th century, writers tied it to everything from Egyptian pyramids to Mayan temples, suggesting a common origin for advanced civilizations. In the 20th, theosophists and occultists expanded it further, imagining Atlantis as a spiritually advanced society whose destruction marked a fall from grace. All of these retellings show that the myth had already slipped free of its original boundaries. Atlantis became a mirror, reflecting whatever people most wanted or feared to believe. If you wanted to believe in a glorious past, Atlantis was proof. If you wanted to warn against arrogance, Atlantis was caution. If you wanted to explain why cultures across the world shared similarities, Atlantis was the missing link. But Atlantis isn't the only story of a lost city beneath the waves. The Indian epic Mahabharata describes the city of Dwarka, home of the god Krishna, as eventually sinking beneath the ocean. Modern archaeology near the coast of Gujarat has revealed submerged structures that may align with that story, though debates continue. In Celtic tradition, the land of Lyonesse was said to stretch between Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly before it sank. In Welsh lore, the kingdom of Contra Gwaelod was lost to the sea when a careless guard failed to close its floodgates. In Japan, stories speak of Urashima Taro visiting the dragon palace beneath the ocean, where time flowed differently. In Norse mythology, the world serpent lurks in the depths, circling the earth. In the Pacific, Polynesian cultures tell of vanished islands and kingdoms beneath the waves, sometimes visible on clear days. In the Americas, tribes speak of great floods that reshaped their lands, leaving ruins under rivers and lakes. What's remarkable is how consistent the themes are: a city thriving, then taken by the sea. People vanishing yet not entirely gone, hints of palaces, lights, or voices beneath the waves. Whether it's Atlantis, Dwarka, Lyonesse, or countless smaller legends, the pattern repeats. The sea doesn't just erase, it hides. Some of these stories may reflect real geological events. We know sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the last ice age, swallowing coastlines and displacing communities. We know earthquakes and tsunamis can sink entire regions in minutes. We've seen modern examples like the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, where entire towns were erased by the force of water. Ancient people living through such events would naturally preserve them in story. But again, story is not just memory, it's also imagination. When a city disappears beneath the waves, people don't only remember what was lost, they wonder what became of it. They picture it continuing beneath the surface, still alive in some form. That's how echoes of Atlantis become more than allegory. They become living questions. And then there are the strange finds that fuel those questions. Divers discovering stone formations that look like steps or walls, sonar scans revealing shapes that resemble roads or buildings, artifacts pulled from the seabed that don't quite fit with known timelines. Each discovery sparks speculation, and speculation reinforces the old stories. Skeptics say most of these are natural formations, coincidences of geology. But even skeptics can't explain why so many different cultures told the same kinds of tales long before science began asking. Perhaps Atlantis is less important as a single place and more important as a symbol of a larger pattern. Maybe there wasn't one great lost city, but many, coastlines across the world flooded as ice melted, each with its own settlements, each leaving behind survivors who told stories. When you add those stories together, you get the global chorus of myths about vanished civilizations beneath the sea. That chorus still resonates today. We still talk about Atlantis as if it might be found. Documentaries revisit it. Writers reinterpret it. Tourists search for clues. Part of the appeal is hope that maybe beneath all the stories lies a truth we can uncover. But another part is longing. Atlantis and its echoes represent the idea that we're missing something, that history has gaps, that our understanding of humanity is incomplete. And that feeling is powerful. The echoes also serve another function. They remind us that the ocean is not empty. When you stand at the shore and look out, it seems like a blank surface, but in the imagination it's crowded with memory. Every wave could be rolling over ruins, every current brushing past forgotten streets. Even if nothing is physically there, the idea shapes how we see the water. It becomes not just ocean, but archive, a place where time itself collects. And if we take the idea further, these echoes might not just be about the past. Maybe they're hints of a present we haven't acknowledged. If Atlantis was real, if Dwarka truly sank, if Lioness once existed, then who's to say the people didn't adapt instead of vanish? Perhaps what we call myths are not eulogies, but reports distorted by centuries of encounters with survivors who chose the sea instead of the land. That perspective makes the stories feel less like endings and more like beginnings. Atlantis isn't only about destruction, it's about survival in another form. Dwarka isn't only about loss, it's about transformation. Each legend might be a fragment of the larger truth we keep circling, that the ocean may hold civilizations we've yet to meet. And from here it's natural to ask how those civilizations might look if they did exist. What kind of architecture could survive in the abyss? What shapes, what structures, what materials would allow life to flourish in places we still struggle to reach? When we think about architecture, we usually imagine walls, roofs, streets, and towers built against gravity and weather. Our buildings are designed to keep out rain, wind, and extremes of temperature. They stand upright on solid foundations, pushing into the sky as far as materials and engineering will allow. But underwater, the rules change completely. The abyss doesn't ask for height or solidity. It asks for balance with pressure, for harmony with currents, for resilience against darkness. So if we imagine a civilization living there, their architecture would not look like ours at all. The first difference is gravity. On land, everything falls. Structures must resist collapse, every stone pressed down by its own weight. In water, buoyancy softens that force. Weight is distributed differently, and density matters more than mass. An underwater society wouldn't need towering supports. They could build with lighter materials, let structures float, or anchor them gently, instead of stacking them heavily. Their cities might spread horizontally, drifting with the currents instead of rising vertically like our skyscrapers. Then comes pressure. At depths where we struggle to send even our strongest machines, pressure builds so intensely it would crush unprepared structures. Any architecture there would need to embrace that force, not fight it. Spherical shapes withstand pressure better than flat ones. These spherical shapes withstand pressure better than flat ones. Domes, shells, and curves would dominate design. We see this already in sea life. Fish with rounded bodies, shells with spirals, creatures shaped to distribute force evenly. An underwater civilization might copy those same principles, growing or building dwellings that echo the resilience of natural forms. Materials would be different too. Stone and concrete, the staples of our cities, crack and erode quickly under constant water flow. Metals corrode, but coral, shell, and volcanic rock thrive in those conditions. It's possible their architecture wouldn't be built in the sense we understand, but grown. Coral can be guided into shapes over time. kelp can be woven into walls. Volcanic stone already forms arches, caves, and ridges. Instead of imposing their will on the environment, they might shape what's already there, encouraging growth and stability in ways that blend technology and biology. Imagine a city anchored along a hydrothermal vent. The vent produces not only heat, but minerals that harden into towers of stone. A people could use those towers as natural pillars, carving or growing structures around them. Light could come from bioluminescent organisms cultivated along walls, glowing like lanterns in the dark. Ceilings could be formed from woven kelp seeded with algae that give off faint illumination. Whole neighborhoods could glow softly, not with electricity but with life itself. This integration with biology would make their architecture almost invisible to us. If we sent a submersible past, we might see only coral and plants, not realizing they had been shaped deliberately. What looks like a reef to us could be a settlement to them. What looks like an arch of stone could be a doorway. Our assumption that architecture must stand apart from nature blinds us to the possibility of architecture woven into it. Mobility might also be part of their design. Our cities are fixed. We build them where we can, and they remain there for centuries. But underwater, currents shift, tectonic plates move. Storms stir the seabed. A permanent city might be less practical than a mobile one. Imagine structures designed to drift slowly, anchored when needed, but free to move if conditions change. Homes that float within a certain range, tethered like balloons, yet able to be relocated with ease. Such fluidity would make sense in a world where change is constant. Social organization could influence structure too. We live in cities defined by roads, districts, and boundaries. But underwater, those concepts blur. There are no roads in the same sense, no borders drawn in soil. Movement happens in 3 dimensions, up and down as much as side to side. An underwater city might look more like a cloud than a grid, clusters of dwellings suspended at different depths, connected by trails of light or sound. Orientation wouldn't be horizontal but volumetric, a whole sphere of life rather than a flat plane. And then there is the question of monuments. We build monuments to endure, to declare presence. But in the deep sea, permanence is fragile. Perhaps their monuments are soundscapes instead of statues, vibrations set into structures that last for centuries. Perhaps their art is bioluminescent displays, living murals that shift over time. What we think of as decoration could be entire systems of communication and memory. The absence of light changes design dramatically too. On land, we orient around the sun. We open windows. We plan for day and night. Underwater, especially in the abyss, there is no natural light at all. Architecture there would need to generate its own. Bioluminescence offers a natural solution, but so do thermal and chemical reactions. Perhaps entire plazas glow faintly with cultivated bacteria, lighting spaces in hues we don't normally see. Perhaps homes are marked by patterns of light unique to each family, like addresses glowing in the dark. Acoustics would matter just as much. Sound travels far underwater, so structures could be designed not only for living but for resonance. A hall might be shaped to amplify a signal, a wall curved to carry a hum farther. What we think of as music might be built into their very architecture, with currents passing through corridors to create tones that serve as constant background communication. Imagine swimming through such a city. Instead of streets, you'd pass through columns of coral, arches of stone, and glowing gardens. Instead of lamps, bioluminescent organisms would pulse softly around you. Instead of silence, you'd hear low vibrations carrying messages across distances. And instead of rigid walls, you'd find structures alive, shifting slightly with currents, resilient because they're part of the ecosystem rather than set against it. This raises an important point. We might have already passed over such architecture without recognizing it. Sonar scans detect shapes. But what if those shapes are biological rather than carved? Divers see reefs and assume they're natural. But what if they're guided? We assume cities must stand apart from nature, but theirs might blend so completely we mistake them for landscape. There's also the question of scale. Our cities sprawl across kilometers. Theirs might be smaller, more distributed, clusters of homes rather than vast urban centers. Instead of one large city, perhaps they live in networks, each community connected by sound and light, spread across vast distances. This would make them even harder to detect, and it would explain why we haven't stumbled across obvious ruins. Even our concept of shelter might not apply in the same way. On land, we seek walls and roofs to protect us from weather. Underwater, temperature and pressure are constant. Storms pass overhead without touching the depths, and the ocean itself is both danger and protection. Their dwellings might be less about shielding and more about anchoring, less about separation and more about connection. All of this makes their architecture feel alien to us, yet perfectly logical in its own context. It reminds us that design isn't universal. It's a response to environment. We build for air and gravity. They would build for water and pressure. Once you accept that, the possibilities open wide. And if their architecture is so different, it would naturally lead to different culture. The spaces we live in shape how we think, how we organize, how we relate to each other. Their world of floating clusters, glowing walls, and resonant halls would create patterns of life we can only guess at. And once you begin to picture that, the next question comes naturally. How would light and darkness shape not just their buildings, but their entire way of life? What does it mean to exist in a world where the sun never reaches, where illumination must come from within, where visibility itself is something you create rather than something you inherit from the sky? On land, light is the first measure of life. It tells us when to wake, when to sleep, when to plant, when to harvest. It shapes our calendars, our religions, even our moods. Most of human culture has been built around the rhythm of sunrise and sunset. But beneath the sea, especially in the deeper regions, light disappears quickly. By a few hundred meters down, daylight is faint. By 1,000, it's gone entirely. So if a civilization grew beneath the waves, their relationship with light and darkness would be nothing like ours. For them, the sun wouldn't be a daily companion. It would be a distant rumor, a force felt more than seen. Their world would be one where light is rare, precious, and often created by life itself. Instead of a steady cycle of day and night, illumination would come in flashes, pulses, and glows. Whole communities could be defined not by streets and walls, but by the way they generate and manage light. Bioluminescence is already a common language in the ocean. Countless creatures glow, from jellyfish to anglerfish to squid. Some produce light to lure prey, others to signal mates, others to confuse predators. If a society lived among them, it's easy to imagine that light itself would become part of culture. Perhaps homes glow with cultivated organisms, creating patterns like constellations. Perhaps families mark themselves with unique displays of shifting color, like coats of arms that shimmer instead of sit on shields. Light could be practical too. In a place where visibility is limited, carrying light is like carrying identity. It marks who you are and where you belong. Traveling without light might be dangerous. Like walking into a city without speaking its language, entire rituals could grow around the giving or sharing of light. Partnerships, alliances, even conflicts could be expressed through patterns of brightness or darkness. Darkness itself would also hold meaning. On land, darkness often represents ignorance or fear, but underwater, darkness is normal. It isn't absence. It's the background against which everything happens. In that sense, darkness would not be frightening. It would be comforting, familiar, even sacred. Perhaps communities choose to live mostly in shadow, using light only when necessary. Perhaps light is rationed or saved for ceremonies, while daily life flows easily in near blackness. Imagine how different perception would be in such a world. Our eyes rely on constant input from sunlight. Theirs might rely on sensitivity to the faintest glimmers, or on senses beyond sight altogether. Sound, vibration, and touch could dominate, with light serving as punctuation rather than foundation. Vision wouldn't mean scanning a broad field in daylight, but interpreting brief sparks in darkness. This shift would change art as well. Our art relies on contrast between light and shadow, on pigment illuminated by sun or lamp. Theirs might rely on rhythm of glow, on coordinated flashes like living fireworks. Entire performances could be staged with groups of individuals pulsing in harmony, creating moving patterns across the water. What looks to us like a school of glowing fish might to them be a carefully choreographed expression of history or belief. Darkness could also shape philosophy. We think of time as marked by days and nights. They might think of it as stretches of dark, punctuated by moments of glow. We think of life as linear, from morning to evening, spring to winter. They might think of it as cyclical, like the appearance and disappearance of bioluminescence. Even their sense of identity could be tied to the play between light and shadow, with each person seen as a balance of both. The deep ocean is also full of sudden bursts of light that seem almost supernatural. Condé jellies ripple with rainbow flashes. Dinoflagellates turn entire waves into glowing sheets. Some fish explode with dazzling displays when threatened. To ancient people watching from above, these lights may have looked like cities or lanterns deep in the water. To those living among them, they would be part of daily reality. But instead of seeing them as accidents of biology, a civilization might integrate them into culture, farming glowing organisms, the way we farm crops, arranging them into patterns, carrying them as tools. There's another layer too. In darkness, secrecy is easier. A society could choose to remain unseen simply by controlling its light. Perhaps they glow only when they wish to be found. Perhaps they've mastered the art of moving without leaving a trace of brightness, disappearing into shadow when necessary. In that way, darkness becomes a form of power, a way to choose when to reveal and when to conceal. This relationship to light and darkness could also affect how they view us. From beneath the sea, our cities would look like enormous patches of brightness, visible even from space. To them we might seem reckless, wasting light constantly, pouring it into the sky without thought. They might see our obsession with illumination as strange, even dangerous, a refusal to accept darkness as part of life. And perhaps that judgment wouldn't be wrong. Our reliance on artificial light has severed us from natural cycles in many ways. Underwater, a civilization forced to live mostly in darkness might retain a deeper connection to balance, pacing their lives in ways we've forgotten. Practically speaking, light and darkness would also shape how they navigate. We use roads, signs, and maps. They might use glowing trails of organisms or sound patterns that echo through specific corridors. Light could serve as markers, with communities arranging signals to guide travelers. Entire highways of faint glow could connect settlements, shifting as currents move them. Darkness, meanwhile, might be used to protect. Communities could dim themselves when threatened, vanishing into shadow. Predators might be lured into glowing traps. Attackers could be blinded by sudden bursts of light. What we think of as a simple environmental factor becomes in their world a whole system of defense, identity, and survival. Imagine living your entire life in such an environment, waking not to sunlight but to faint pulses of glow from your surroundings, navigating not by clear vision but by interpreting glimmers and shadows, celebrating not with fireworks but with choreographed displays of living light, believing not in a sun above but in illumination that comes from within. It would shape not only your culture but your sense of reality itself. And yet it isn't entirely alien. We already respond strongly to light and darkness. We're drawn to candles, fascinated by fireflies, soothed by dim stars. The human brain finds comfort in small lights against dark backgrounds. Perhaps that's why stories of underwater worlds glowing in the abyss feel so natural to us. They echo something we already know instinctively. It's possible that the first civilizations beneath the sea learned to use light not just for practical needs, but as a core of identity. Their art, religion, and memory might all be tied to it. If so, then the myths we tell of glowing palaces and radiant beings might be distant echoes of that reality. And once you begin to imagine this, it becomes clear that living in such conditions wouldn't only be about light itself, but about pressure. Because while light disappears quickly underwater, pressure never leaves. It builds constantly, invisibly, pressing against every surface, every body, shaping life in ways we can hardly imagine. Pressure is the constant presence that defines the deep ocean more than anything else. On the surface, we barely notice it. Just one atmosphere of weight pressing from above, something our bodies are built to handle without thought. But for every 10 meters you descend into the sea, another atmosphere of pressure is added. At 100 meters, it feels like 10 times the weight of the air we live under. At 1,000, it's 100 times. At the deepest trenches, it reaches more than 1,000 atmospheres, forces so immense they would crush steel if it weren't carefully engineered. To us, pressure is the wall that keeps us out. It limits how far we can dive, how long we can stay, what tools we can use. Submarines have to be built like fortresses, and even then they creak under the strain. Divers who descend too quickly risk nitrogen bubbles forming in their blood, a condition we call the bends. For us, pressure is a threat, invisible but absolute. But for life in the deep, pressure is not an obstacle. It's the environment itself. Fish, worms, and crustaceans live comfortably where we can't survive. Their bodies adapted to conditions we find impossible. Some have proteins that prevent their cells from collapsing. Others have flexible structures that bend instead of breaking. To them, pressure isn't danger, it's normal. So if a civilization has lived in the deep, pressure wouldn't be a wall for them either. It would be the air they breathe, the ground they stand on, the constant fact of existence. Their architecture, their bodies, their tools, all would be shaped by it. They wouldn't think of it as something to overcome, but as something to use. Imagine what that means for design. Our buildings resist gravity. Theirs would harmonize with pressure. Spherical and curved shapes would dominate, not by choice, but because those shapes endure best. Their materials would need to flex rather than crack. Their dwellings perhaps grown from living structures that adapt as they grow. Where we see crushing force, they would see stability, a constant that allows life to remain steady, even in the absence of light or warmth. Pressure could even become a resource. Differences in pressure can generate energy. As currents shift from one level to another, perhaps they learn to harness that, building systems that convert the invisible weight of the deep into power. Instead of fighting pressure, they might ride it, the way we ride wind or water. It's also possible that pressure shaped their very bodies. Maybe they are denser than us, built to withstand forces that would collapse our lungs and crush our bones. Perhaps they have no lungs at all, no air-filled cavities to risk implosion. Their organs might be fluid-filled, flexible, compressing and expanding with the environment. In that sense, they would look alien to us, not because they're unnatural, but because they're perfectly natural for a place we aren't built to survive. This shift in biology would change culture too. On land, we think of pressure as metaphor, a weight on our shoulders, a force to be endured. For them, pressure would be life itself. It would be the constant companion, the measure of safety, the defining boundary. Maybe they would even use it as metaphor in reverse. Instead of pressure meaning stress, it could mean comfort. To be under pressure might mean to be at home. The invisible nature of pressure also makes it a powerful teacher. You can't see it, but you can feel it. It surrounds you, presses against every part of you, reminding you that the world isn't empty, even when it looks like darkness. Perhaps their philosophies, their religions, even their stories are shaped by that fact. They might believe that all things are connected by an unseen force, because in their world, that's literally true. Think about how this would influence communication. Sound travels differently under pressure. Higher pressures can bend and distort signals, carry them farther, or limit them depending on conditions. An underwater society would know this intuitively. They would design their messages, their songs, even their architecture to work with pressure. not against it. Pressure also defines depth. Each level of the sea carries its own conditions, its own limits. Perhaps communities would be organized vertically, some living at shallower depths where light still reaches faintly, others deeper in total darkness, each adapted to its own band of pressure. Travel between them might be rare or ceremonial, because bodies adapted to one level might not survive in another. What to us feels like one environment, the ocean could to them be a whole stratified world, with layers as distinct as continents. And if they have lived this way for millennia, pressure would not just shape survival, but identity. We define ourselves by land, by borders, by nations. They might define themselves by depth, by the weight above them, by how much pressure their bodies and homes are built to withstand. Our encounters with pressure have always been brief, but revealing. When submersibles reach the deep, they sometimes glimpse fish with transparent bodies, organisms with strange adaptations, creatures that look fragile but are in fact perfectly suited to conditions that would destroy us. Every one of these discoveries reminds us that our definition of survivable is narrow. Life doesn't ask our permission, it adapts. So it's not hard to imagine a people who see pressure the way we see air, an invisible medium taken for granted, never questioned until someone leaves it and realizes how different the world feels without it. Perhaps when they rise toward the surface, they feel exposed, fragile, as if something is missing. Maybe they even fear it. The way we fear suffocating, what we call relief from pressure, might feel to them like danger. This inversion challenges our assumptions. We think of the surface as normal, and the deep as extreme, but from their perspective, the deep would be normal, and the surface extreme. Our environment would feel hostile to them, just as theirs feels hostile to us. And that means the wall of pressure isn't absolute. It's relative. It depends on where you begin. This relativity could also explain why contact hasn't happened. Moving between worlds shaped by such different pressures is almost impossible. Our bodies can't handle their world, and theirs might not handle ours. Even if we crossed paths, it would be fleeting. Brief encounters at the edge of survivability. Myths of beings seen and then vanishing could be traces of such moments. We might also wonder how pressure influences time for them. In our world, we measure time by cycles of sun and moon. In theirs, perhaps time is measured by depth. Deeper means slower, more deliberate, less change. Shallower means faster, more turbulent, more exposed. This isn't just physics, but perception. Living under constant pressure might create a sense of time that is weighty, layered, and patient. Imagine their stories told not with images of sky or stars, but with images of pressure, creation myths, where the world begins as a place without weight, chaos without form, until pressure gave it shape. Legends of heroes who descended to deeper levels, enduring greater and greater forces to bring back wisdom. Philosophy built around the idea that strength comes not from resisting pressure, but from embracing it. This way of thinking would make their civilization almost invisible to us. We search for signs of resistance, of fortresses built against the elements. They might build with the elements, shaping lives so integrated with pressure that we don't recognize them as separate from the environment. And if pressure defines their existence, then food, energy, and survival would also be shaped by it. Because in the deep, you don't farm fields or raise animals the way we do. You find sustenance in ecosystems that thrive under pressure, in chemical reactions at vents, in organisms we barely understand. Food and energy are the foundations of any society. Without them, survival is temporary, and civilization cannot grow. On land, we solve this by domesticating plants and animals, cultivating fields, and storing harvests. Our energy came from fire at first, then from coal, oil, and electricity. But in the deep ocean, those solutions don't exist. There are no wide fields to plant, no cattle to herd, no forests to burn. The silent blue demands different answers. So if a civilization has lived there, they must have discovered entirely new ways to sustain themselves. The first question is, Food. Sunlight barely reaches beyond a few hundred meters, and without light, photosynthesis fails. Most of the ocean's productivity happens near the surface, where plankton bloom and fish gather. Deeper down, food becomes scarce, yet life persists even in the darkest trenches. It does so by relying on what scientists call marine snow, a slow rain of organic material drifting from above. Tiny particles of dead plankton, waste, and bits of decayed life fall continuously, feeding organisms below. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. A hidden civilization might begin there, learning to harvest and concentrate this constant trickle. Perhaps they built structures that trap marine snow, funneling it into reserves. Maybe they farmed filter feeders like mussels, clams, or sponges that naturally capture drifting nutrients. Over time, these systems could become the equivalent of fields and orchards, tended carefully, producing steady food in a place where scarcity rules. But marine snow alone might not be enough. The deep ocean also has rich ecosystems built around hydrothermal vents. Here, chemicals erupt from the Earth's crust, rich in hydrogen sulfide and other compounds. Bacteria feed on these chemicals, creating a base for entire food webs. Tube worms, shrimp, crabs, and fish thrive where no sunlight reaches, powered by chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis. For us, it looks alien, like something from another planet. For a civilization down there, it could be the heart of survival. Imagine them cultivating vent ecosystems the way we cultivate crops, tending bacterial mats, encouraging growth, protecting and harvesting animals that feed there. Perhaps they even domesticated some of these creatures, guiding their reproduction, shaping environments for higher yields. Just as we turned wild grains into wheat, they could have turned wild vent organisms into food sources adapted to their needs. Another possibility is kelp and seaweed in shallower regions. Though not deep-sea life, these can grow prolifically along coasts and mid-depths. They're nutritious, renewable, and easy to harvest. Maybe early underwater societies lived close to the surface, cultivating kelp forests, weaving them into architecture and feeding on them as they adapted to greater depths. They might have brought versions of those crops with them, engineered or encouraged to grow in darker conditions with the help of bioluminescent organisms. Protein could come from fish and crustaceans, but unlike us, they wouldn't need nets and boats. They would have direct access. Imagine schools of fish drawn toward glowing lures cultivated by the people themselves. Whole communities could engineer ecosystems that attract prey naturally, like farmers setting traps but on a biological scale. Energy is the other side of the equation. We burn fuels. Underwater, fire doesn't work. So what alternatives exist? Currents themselves could provide constant power. Underwater turbines, natural or engineered, could turn flow into energy. Thermal gradients between hot vent water and cold surrounding sea could be harnessed too. Bacteria already exploit those differences, and perhaps a civilization could mimic them with technology or biology. Bioluminescence might also be used not just for light, but for energy. Organisms that glow release chemical reactions that could be tapped in creative ways. Cultivated on large scales, they could provide both illumination and warmth. Entire districts might glow softly, not because of electricity, but because of fields of living organisms designed to sustain the community. Oxygen is another survival requirement, and we've already considered how they might breathe. But oxygen is also tied to energy. Metabolic systems depend on it. Maybe their diets and energy systems are designed to minimize oxygen needs. Foods high in fats or compounds suited to low oxygen metabolism might dominate. What seems inedible to us could be staples for them. Storage is crucial as well. On land, we store grain in silos, salt meat, preserve vegetables. Underwater, they might store energy and food differently. Cold water itself is a natural preservative, slowing decay. Caves and trenches could serve as storage chambers. Pressure could be used to seal and compress supplies, keeping them stable for long periods. Consider culture around food. Our societies are shaped by agriculture, with festivals, rituals, and economies built around planting and harvest. Theirs might be shaped by cycles of vents, currents, and migrations. If vent activity changes seasonally, celebrations could mark the times of abundance. If marine snow thickens during certain periods, perhaps entire cultural calendars align with that rain of nutrients. The silence of the deep would shape these rituals too. Meals might not be loud gatherings, but quiet ones, where sharing food is done with care and reverence. The scarcity of resources would make every bite meaningful, and that meaning could infuse their philosophy. Instead of abundance celebrated in excess, scarcity celebrated in balance, survival itself as ritual. Tools for gathering would also look different. Nets are useless in tight, dark spaces. Instead, they might use sound or vibration to corral fish, do glowing signals to lure prey, or even trained animals to help hunt. Dolphins have been used by humans for such purposes. Perhaps they formed symbiotic relationships with creatures of the deep, partnerships built over centuries. The beauty of this speculation is that it isn't entirely alien. On land, we already rely on relationships with other species for food, bees for pollination, dogs and cats for protection and companionship, cattle and sheep for meat and milk. Underwater, such partnerships could be just as important, only with creatures that seem alien to us. Energy use would also affect how they build and live. Without fire, metallurgy would be limited. Perhaps they never developed metals at all, relying instead on stone, shell, and organic materials. Perhaps they found ways to harness vent heat for shaping tools, or chemical processes to strengthen coral and shell. Their technology could be entirely different from ours, based on chemistry and biology instead of metallurgy and mechanics. Imagine how this would influence their concept of power. For us, energy is dominance, burning, consuming, conquering. For them, it might be harmony, guiding flows, cultivating life, tapping resources without exhausting them. Scarcity teaches patience, abundance teaches caution. If survival depends on maintaining balance with fragile ecosystems, their entire civilization might be built around restraint rather than expansion. And yet survival in the silent blue wouldn't only be about food and energy, it would also be about community, about sharing and conserving. In such an environment, selfishness could be fatal. Cooperation wouldn't be a moral choice. It would be necessity. Cultures shaped by that necessity would value collaboration deeply, perhaps even more than we do. Think of how our feasts bring people together, how harvest festivals are about more than food. Underwater, the same would be true. The act of eating might be communal, survival celebrated as a group achievement. Scarcity would make generosity the highest virtue, and hoarding the greatest crime. All of this paints a picture of survival that looks alien yet familiar. Alien because it relies on systems we barely understand, like chemosynthesis and bioluminescence. Familiar because the principles are the same: gather, store, share, sustain. Survival everywhere is built on those foundations, whether on land or beneath the sea. And once survival is secured, the next natural question is whether contact could ever happen. If they exist, hidden in the deep, could we ever meet them? What barriers stand in the way? And what possibilities would such a meeting hold? The question that lingers behind every myth, every speculation, every sonar ping and deep-sea dive is simple. If they are there, could we ever meet them? Could two civilizations separated, not by distance but by environment, ever come face to face? On the surface, it feels like the answer should be yes. After all, we share the same planet. Our ships cross their world constantly. Our fishing nets dip into it. Our machines map it. Our oil drills pierce it. The ocean is everywhere, and we are always pressing into it. But the closer you look, the more difficult the question becomes. Because meeting is not just about proximity, it's about compatibility. Start with the physical barrier. Pressure alone makes contact nearly impossible. Our bodies collapse under the weight of their world. theirs might rupture in hours. Even with technology, we can only stay in the deep for short bursts. Submarines protect us, but they isolate us too. Thick walls keeping us safe, but also cutting off direct experience. And if their biology is shaped by pressure, even brief contact at shallow depths might be lethal for them. Imagine two worlds touching only at the edge, each barely able to survive in the other's environment. That edge might be the shallows, where we can dive with help. And they can ascend briefly, but even there, the meeting would be fragile, limited to moments. It might explain why myths describe brief encounters, sailors seeing beings in the waves, fishermen pulled below for a time, stories of visitors from the sea who vanish as quickly as they appear. Then there's the problem of communication. Even if we stood face to face, how would we speak? Their language might not be words at all, but pulses of sound or flashes of light. What we hear as noise could be complex dialogue. What we see as glowing organisms might be messages. Translation would take time, patience, and mutual willingness. It's not impossible. Humans have learned to understand whales and dolphins to some degree, but it would be slow. Trust is another barrier. From their perspective, we might look dangerous. Our ships leak oil. Our nets kill without care. Our sonar deafens whales. The noise we make fills their world constantly, intruding without invitation. If they have remained hidden this long, it may be because they know us already and choose to stay away. From our perspective, their existence would be unsettling, even threatening. Entire industries depend on the ocean as empty space. Governments would worry about sovereignty. Religions might see them as challenge or confirmation. The politics of such a meeting could be overwhelming. But humans are persistent. We've always sought contact, whether with distant tribes, unknown continents, or even imagined beings on other planets. We might continue probing until contact happens, whether by accident or design. Perhaps it already has. Isolated stories of encounters with mermaids, sea spirits, or strange lights beneath the waves may be distorted memories of real meetings. Most were dismissed as hallucination or exaggeration. But if contact was brief and rare, that's exactly how it would look. Technology could also change the possibilities. As submersibles become more advanced, as remote drones dive deeper and longer, as sensors sharpen, our chances of stumbling onto something grow. If they are there, hiding may become harder over time. But the opposite might also be true. Their awareness of us might grow too, and they might develop better ways to avoid detection. In that case, meeting becomes not about capability, but about choice. Choice is at the heart of it. Even if we could meet them, would they want to? History suggests caution. When two civilizations of unequal power meet, the smaller one suffers. Diseases, exploitation, conquest, all of these followed human encounters on land. If they've observed us, they may have decided that the risks outweigh the benefits. From their perspective, staying hidden ensures survival. And yet, the pull of curiosity works both ways. Just as we wonder about them, they might wonder about us. Perhaps they watch our ships, follow our submarines, listen to our machines. Maybe they study us the way we study whales, fascinated by our strange habits, puzzled by our dependence on light and land. Perhaps in rare moments curiosity outweighs caution, and they approach. If a true meeting did happen, the consequences would be immense, not just for science, but for identity. Humanity has always believed itself to be the only advanced civilization on Earth. Discovering another, especially one older, would shatter that assumption. History would have to be rewritten. Religion, philosophy, politics, all would shift. And for us, that kind of change is never easy. But perhaps the meeting wouldn't be grand. Maybe it wouldn't be an announcement to the world, but something quiet. A diver encountering a figure in the shadows, a submersible camera capturing a glimpse of movement that doesn't fit, a fisherman telling a story no one believes. Perhaps contact has already happened this way, countless times, but never lasted long enough to convince the wider world. And if we ask whether we could meet them, we also have to ask whether we should. Sometimes mystery serves a purpose. If they survive by remaining hidden, our intrusion might harm more than it helps. Maybe the most respectful meeting is none at all, a recognition that coexistence doesn't always require contact. Yet it's hard to silence curiosity. The ocean covers more than 2/3 of the planet, and the idea that someone else is down there pulls at us constantly. Every myth, every sonar anomaly, every story of strange encounters feeds the hope that someday the invisible wall will thin just enough for a true meeting. And if that day comes, the next question would be how we communicate. What bridges exist between our languages, and how might sound, light, and rhythm allow us to understand each other? If meeting is possible, even fleetingly, the next challenge is communication. History shows us that when two human cultures meet without a common language, misunderstanding is inevitable. Sometimes it leads to violence, other times to slow learning, gestures becoming words, words becoming dialogue. But when we think of communicating with a civilization that has lived underwater for millennia, we have to prepare ourselves for a challenge far greater than any human encounter on land. Their language may not resemble ours at all. Spoken words rely on air moving through vocal cords, vibrations shaped by tongue and lips, sound waves traveling through open air. Underwater, that system collapses. Air escapes too quickly, sound carries differently, consonants vanish. We struggle to speak clearly even with scuba gear. So if they developed language, it likely evolved in a medium where water itself is the carrier. Sound behaves strangely underwater. It travels faster and farther, but it also bends and distorts with changes in temperature, salinity, and pressure. Whales take advantage of this, sending low-frequency calls that can cross entire ocean basins. Dolphins use bursts of clicks, sharp and directional, bouncing them off objects like sonar. Shrimp snap loudly enough to create walls of noise. An underwater civilization would know all of this intimately, shaping their language not just as sound, but as sound designed for water. Imagine a language built on pulses, tones, and rhythms, not sentences strung together with grammar, but sequences of vibration that carry meaning through repetition and pattern. Perhaps a single phrase could ripple outward, bouncing off structures, interpreted differently depending on timing and echo. Their architecture itself might be part of language, resonating to amplify or distort signals. And sound might not be the only medium. Light is another candidate. Countless ocean species use bioluminescence to signal one another. Squid flash patterns across their skin faster than we can blink. Jellyfish shimmer like living lanterns. Fish pulse to attract or repel. A civilization surrounded by this would likely incorporate it. Communication might be both auditory and visual, sound paired with bursts of light, meaning layered like chords in music. To us, it would look like chaos, flashes and hums in the dark, but to them, it would be precise, maybe even more precise than our speech, carrying multiple streams of meaning at once. One sequence could express emotion, another could relay fact, a third could indicate social position. Where we rely on tone of voice or facial expression to supplement words, they might encode all of it directly into light and sound. Touch could also play a role. In water, vibration is felt as well as heard. Currents brushing the body, changes in pressure, movements in the dark, all can be sensed. Imagine greetings exchanged not by handshake or bow, but by patterns of movement, flows of water stirred deliberately. To us, it would seem like drifting aimlessly. To them, it would be full of nuance. So how would we begin to communicate? The first step would be listening. Not listening in the way we usually mean, but recording, observing, searching for repetition and pattern. This is how we've approached whales and dolphins, building libraries of sounds, looking for grammar in the flow, but even then we struggle. Decades of study have given us only glimpses. With a civilization shaped by pressure and darkness, the challenge would multiply. Gestures could help. When human explorers met strangers on land, they pointed, mimed, drew in the sand. Underwater, gestures might still work, but more slowly, distorted by currents. Perhaps lights could serve instead, shining patterns, repeating rhythms, offering signs of recognition. The challenge would be patience, resisting the urge to force understanding too quickly. Trust is part of communication too. Words alone aren't enough. Tone, posture, context, all matter. If they see us as threatening, no pattern of sound will convince them otherwise. Communication would require not just language, but behavior, proof that we approach with respect. And maybe they have already tried. Strange reports of lights beneath ships, unexplained sounds recorded by hydrophones, encounters with glowing forms near coasts. What if these are not accidents, but attempts at dialogue? Perhaps they've sent signals, but we lack the framework to recognize them as intentional. We hear a sound and call it seismic. We see a light and call it biological. Maybe we've been spoken to all along, without realizing it. If true contact ever occurred, the first shared language might not be words, but rhythm. Patterns of repetition, pulses that mean yes or no, safe or danger. Music might serve better than speech. Humans instinctively respond to rhythm, and water carries it perfectly. Perhaps communication would begin not with conversation, but with shared beats. Two civilizations pulsing in time until trust forms. Light could follow. Simple signals at first, bright for yes, dark for no. Over time, more complex sequences, eventually entire conversations in light alone. We already do something similar with computers, encoding meaning in binary flashes of electricity. Maybe they've been doing it with light for millennia. The challenge of translation would be enormous, not only because of different media, but because of different worldviews. Our words reflect our environment. We have countless terms for land, sky, and fire. They might have countless terms for currents, pressure, and darkness. What we call day might have no equivalent. What they call depth might have no equivalent for us. Whole concepts could be untranslatable, leaving only approximation. But approximation is still communication, even without perfect translation. We could share enough. Gestures of peace, signs of respect, exchanges of knowledge. Communication doesn't have to be flawless to be meaningful. It's worth remembering that humans have already built connections across seemingly impossible divides. Explorers met cultures with no shared words and still managed to trade, teach, and learn. Today, scientists try to speak with whales, elephants, even artificial intelligence. Communication is less about similarity and more about persistence, willingness to keep trying. So if we ask whether communication across currents is possible, the answer is yes. But slowly, it would take patience, humility, and the willingness to admit that we might not be the ones leading the conversation. We might have to let them teach us how to listen. And if communication succeeds, then the next step would be exchange. What stories would they share? What knowledge would they reveal? What warnings might they give? And just as importantly, what would they want from us? And how would we respond? Time is one of those things we take for granted on land. The sun rises, the sun sets, shadows lengthen and shorten. The seasons shift. We measure our lives in days, weeks, and years because light gives us those markers without asking. Even our sense of age is tied to cycles of daylight and darkness, calendars printed on the turning of the earth beneath the sun. But beneath the ocean, especially in its deeper reaches, those markers vanish. There is no sunrise. There is no sunset. The rhythm of day and night dissolves into endless dark, broken only by flickers of life and the occasional glow from above. So if a civilization has lived there for millennia, time itself must feel different to them. For them, time wouldn't be a matter of hours or days. It would be a matter of currents, migrations, cycles of food supply and pressure. They might measure life in flows rather than ticks, in pulses rather than numbers. Where we say a week, they might say a current's return. Where we say a season, they might say the thickening of marine snow. Time would not be abstract. It would be environmental. Currents could serve as their clocks. Ocean currents are vast rivers of water moving through the sea, shaped by temperature, salinity, and the pull of the earth itself. They can be steady or seasonal, regular or erratic, but to those who live within them, they are constant forces. Perhaps a civilization would learn to measure their lives by the return of a particular current, the way farmers once measured harvest by rains. The movement of water could mark not just survival, but ritual, with communities gathering when a current shifted, feasts aligned with its arrival, stories told when it faded. Food cycles could be another clock. The rain of marine snow grows thicker in certain periods, driven by blooms at the surface. Deep-sea creatures rise and fall in massive migrations each day, but over longer spans, populations shift with climate and season. A civilization might tie its calendars to these patterns, treating abundance and scarcity as natural measures of time. A generation might be defined not by years, but by the cycles of plenty and hunger. Pressure, too, could shape perception. As individuals moved up or down in the water column, pressure would change, altering how their bodies felt, how their environment responded. Maybe pressure shifts became markers of life events, passages into adulthood, ceremonies of descent or ascent. Instead of counting birthdays, they might count how many times they endured a journey into deeper pressure zones. Darkness also bends time. Without a sun or moon, days blur into each other. Psychologists know that humans deprived of natural light quickly lose track of hours. Some stretch their days long, others shorten them. Time becomes fluid, subjective, unreliable. For a people who live permanently in darkness, this fluidity might not be a problem, but a norm. Perhaps their concept of time is elastic, stretching and compressing depending on need. Patience would be natural, urgency rare. This could explain why myths so often describe undersea kingdoms where time flows differently. In Japanese legend, Urashima Taro spends days in the Dragon Palace, but returns to find centuries gone. In Celtic tales of Tir na Nog, time beneath the waves moves at another pace. In Greek myths, mortals who visit Poseidon's halls return confused about how long they were gone. These stories might reflect the reality that time underwater feels altered, unmoored from our sunlit clocks. Biological rhythms would adapt too. On land, circadian cycles are tied to light. Underwater, other cues would replace them. Feeding times, currents, even the faint glow of bioluminescence could serve as triggers. Sleep might not come in long blocks, but in shorter, scattered rests, aligned with environmental cues. Lives might be lived in patterns we would see as chaotic, but which feel natural to them. Imagine a culture where age isn't measured by years, but by depth. Elders aren't those who have seen more summers, but those who have descended more times, endured more pressure shifts, guided more migrations. Wisdom would come from experience of environments, not from counting the march of time. Technology, if they developed it, could further alter time. We use clocks and calendars to impose order. Perhaps they use resonant structures, sounding at intervals tied to currents, keeping communities in sync. Perhaps they rely on collective memory, songs and rhythms passed down to mark cycles. Oral traditions might be their calendars, stories told at the right moment, to remind them of where they are in the flow of life. And maybe, just maybe, they experience time itself differently at the level of perception. Pressure, darkness, and scarcity slow life. Decisions are patient, actions deliberate. In an environment where rushing wastes oxygen and energy, slowness becomes survival. So to them we might appear frantic, burning through moments like fire while they move steadily, conserving. This would make communication with us even harder, not just because of language, but because of pace. We demand quick answers, fast exchanges, constant urgency. They might require long pauses, careful rhythms, extended silence. To us, silence feels like absence. To them, silence might be half the conversation. Even their sense of history would be different. We mark centuries by dynasties, inventions, wars. They might mark them by environmental shifts, the opening and closing of vents, the rising and falling of currents, the long, slow changes in climate beneath the waves. Their history would be geological as much as cultural, tied to the breathing of the planet itself. If this is true, then myths of undersea civilizations where time flows differently are not exaggerations. They are human interpretations of a very real difference in perception. What feels like days to us might feel like moments to them. What feels like moments to us might feel like ages to them. Two worlds living side by side, but moving through time at different speeds. It's worth asking what happens if these perceptions ever collide. If we met them, could we align our sense of time with theirs? Would we slow ourselves to match their patience? Or would we demand they speed to match our urgency? History suggests we would try to impose our pace, but survival might demand the opposite, that we learn to live slower, quieter, more in rhythm with a world that measures time by currents instead of clocks. And perhaps this is part of why they've stayed hidden. To them, our frantic pace might look like instability, danger, recklessness. We live in a rush, burning resources, changing landscapes, demanding growth. They live in patience, balance, slow adaptation. The clash of those two temporalities might be as great a barrier as pressure itself. But if understanding is possible, it could begin with rhythm. Music might bridge the gap again, as it has in so many other contexts. Shared beats, pulses across currents, flows of light repeated in cycles. Communication could grow not just in language, but in time itself, a shared rhythm that allows two civilizations to synchronize briefly. And once you imagine that, the next question becomes clear. If they live by cycles of current and flow, what kinds of stories and histories would they preserve? And how would those stories sound if shared across the boundary between water and air? To understand what it would mean to live underwater, not just survive there for minutes or hours as divers do, but to build entire lives in that environment, we have to think about the psychology of it. What does endless water do to the mind? What happens to perception, to emotion, to social life when the surface above is unreachable and the world around you is pressure, darkness, and silence? On land, we're surrounded by boundaries that reassure us, a horizon to anchor our sight, a sky to give us orientation, ground beneath our feet to remind us of stability. Underwater, especially in the deeper layers, those boundaries dissolve. There is no horizon, no sky, only gradients of dark. Up and down lose meaning, orientation drifts. Humans who dive often report this disorientation, losing track of which way is up, panicking when the body expects light that doesn't exist. To a people born and raised in this environment, the absence of boundaries would not be frightening, but normal. Their psychology would adapt, but it would also be shaped by that constant absence. Their sense of space might be fluid. We think of rooms and streets as contained, measured, fixed. They might think of space as endless, shifting, defined only by sound or glow. Home might not mean four walls, but a zone of familiarity marked by resonance or light. Moving through life would not feel like crossing from one bounded space to another, but like drifting through gradients of connection and familiarity. Darkness would be another shaper of mind. Humans deprived of light for long periods often struggle. Mood disorders, confusion, even hallucinations appear. But for a people whose world is built on darkness, the mind would evolve differently. Instead of fearing it, they would embrace it. Darkness could feel safe, comforting, womb-like. Light might feel intrusive, even overwhelming. In that way, their psychology could be the inverse of ours. Where we fear what we can't see, they might fear overexposure. Silence too plays a role. The deep ocean is not truly silent. It crackles with shrimp, echoes with whale song, rumbles with shifting earth. but compared to the constant noise of human environments, it is profoundly quiet. We crave silence and often can't find it. They would know it constantly. Their communication would be built around it. Their minds tuned to the smallest sound. What feels like unbearable quiet to us might to them be full of nuance and meaning. Then there is the pressure, not just physical, but psychological. The knowledge that above you lies kilometers of water, an unmovable weight pressing constantly. Humans exposed to even small amounts of this sensation often feel awe mixed with dread. To live under it always might foster a sense of humility, a constant awareness of being part of something vast and powerful. Perhaps their psychology is more collective than individual, shaped by the feeling that survival depends on harmony with forces far greater than the self. Scarcity also shapes the mind. Food is limited, oxygen precious, light rare. In such a world, waste would not only be impractical, but unthinkable. Perhaps their entire psychology is built around conservation, patience, restraint. Where our societies often reward consumption and expansion, theirs would reward balance and care. This would influence social relationships. Cooperation would not be optional. Isolation might mean death, while community means survival. Trust would be central. Betrayal catastrophic. Perhaps their minds are more attuned to empathy, more sensitive to group dynamics because the stakes are higher. Imagine the rituals that might emerge. Humans sing to bond, eat together to reinforce community, tell stories to connect. Underwater, these acts would take different forms, but serve the same purpose. Glowing displays might replace bonfires. Rhythmic pulses might replace songs. Communal feeding from shared reserves might replace feasts. The psychology would be the same, belonging, but the medium transformed by the environment. There's also the question of individuality. In a world where survival depends so heavily on cooperation, how much space is there for the self? Do they value personal identity the way we do, or do they subsume it into the collective? Perhaps their psychology doesn't even divide self and group sharply. Perhaps they see themselves as extensions of community, threads in a net impossible to isolate. On land, solitude is a luxury. We seek it for peace. Underwater, solitude might be danger. Drifting too far from the group could mean being lost forever, so their psychology might fear separation deeply, anchoring identity always in relation to others. But there are other layers to consider. Endless water is not only isolating, it's also awe-inspiring. Divers often describe a sense of transcendence, of connection, of being part of something infinite. For a civilization born there, this feeling might be constant. Their psychology could lean towards spirituality, not in the sense of gods above, but in the sense of reverence for the medium they live in. Water itself might be sacred. The infinite expanse a reminder of their place in something larger. Time perception, which we've already touched on, also plays into psychology. In darkness, time feels slower. In scarcity, patience is survival. Perhaps their minds are less anxious, less focused on urgency, more comfortable with waiting. Our psychology, shaped by daylight and schedules, thrives on deadlines. Theirs might thrive on cycles. Conflict would be inevitable, as it is in all societies. But underwater, how would it manifest? We fight with weapons of fire and explosion, things impossible in their world. Perhaps their conflicts are psychological, battles of sound and light, competitions of endurance or patience. Perhaps their warfare, if it exists, is more about disruption than destruction, stealing resources, interrupting communication, breaking trust. Fear would take different forms too. We fear the dark, the unknown, the silence. They might fear exposure to light, separation from the group, interruption of pressure. What terrifies us might soothe them, and what calms us might terrify them. Children in such a society would grow up immersed in endless water, their psychology shaped from the start. They wouldn't learn to fear drowning because water would not be danger. It would be home. They wouldn't learn to measure life by sunrises. They wouldn't learn to orient by horizons. Instead, They'd learn to read vibrations, interpret glows, sense pressure shifts. Their very way of thinking would diverge from ours at the most basic levels. Art and creativity would reflect this psychology, where we paint landscapes. They might create glowing performances, where we carve statues. They might shape soundscapes, where we compose songs. They might choreograph currents. Creativity would be less about objects and more about experiences, ephemeral but powerful. What about dreams? Humans dream with imagery shaped by light, land, and sky. Underwater, dreams might be shaped by darkness, sound, and flow. Perhaps they dream in rhythms rather than pictures, in sensations rather than narratives. The line between waking and dreaming might blur because their daily life already feels fluid, unbounded, immersive. And in this psychology lies the explanation for why they may remain hidden. To us, visibility is value. To them, invisibility might be survival. To us, progress means expansion. To them, stability might mean success. Our psychology drives us to seek them. Theirs might drive them to avoid us. Yet, despite all these differences, there is still overlap, because psychology is shaped by environment, but it is also shaped by need. Love, belonging, meaning, these exist everywhere. They may express them differently, but the core would be the same. Parents caring for children, friends bonding through shared ritual, communities celebrating survival. In that sense, the endless water would not erase humanity, it would simply reshape it. And once we accept that, we can ask the next question. If their psychology is shaped by what they hide beneath, what else does the ocean keep hidden from us? What secrets remain? What histories lie buried? What truths might one day surface? The ocean has always been both a provider and a keeper of secrets. It feeds us, carries our ships, moderates our climate, and yet it conceals more than it reveals. For most of human history, the sea was an edge, a boundary beyond which maps faded into monsters and myths. Even now, in an age of satellites and sonar, vast stretches of it remain uncharted, its floor mapped more poorly than the surface of Mars. To ask what the ocean keeps hidden from us is to ask what we have not yet dared to see, and perhaps what we are not meant to. On a practical level, the ocean hides landscapes, mountains taller than Everest, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, ridges longer than any continental chain. Whole continents once exposed now lie beneath hundreds of meters of water, their coastlines erased by rising seas. Human artifacts, settlements, temples, entire cities could be there, swallowed quietly when ice sheets melted. We know some of them already. Structures near India's Gulf of Cambay, stone formations off Yonaguni, ruins claimed in the Mediterranean. Others surely remain undiscovered, buried beneath silt and current. The ocean also hides life. Every deep-sea expedition seems to discover new species, creatures with forms so alien they could be from another planet. Some glow with living light. Others withstand pressures that would shatter our machines. Others live for centuries, almost immune to aging. The variety reminds us how incomplete our knowledge is. If such strangeness exists in the parts we've seen, what else waits in the parts we haven't? But the question goes deeper than landscapes and species. The ocean keeps histories hidden. Every shipwreck is a frozen moment of time, lying undisturbed for centuries until currents reveal it. The Mediterranean alone holds thousands of wrecks, from Greek triremes to Roman cargo ships to vessels from world wars. Each one is a museum sealed by water. If this is true of the last few thousand years, imagine how many older traces lie even deeper, erased from memory but not from existence. Myths suggest more. Stories of Atlantis, of Lyoness, of Contra Gwaelod, of cities swallowed by the sea. Archaeologists argue over their origins, but myths rarely arise without cause. Perhaps they point to truths hidden in drowned valleys, truths the ocean has kept to itself. Then there are the sounds. Hydrophones record strange noises that no one can explain. Booms, hums, roars, groans. Some are attributed to ice shifting, others to tectonics, others remain mysterious. We call them names like the bloop, the Julia, the upsweep. What if some of these are not natural, but intentional? Signals sent across currents that we've mistaken for geology. The ocean also hides its dangers. Undersea earthquakes and volcanic eruptions can trigger tsunamis that devastate coasts. Currents shift without warning. Storms rise from calm seas. To those who live on land, these seem like sudden disasters, but perhaps to those beneath, they are predictable, part of a system they understand intimately. To us, hidden danger, to them, ordinary pattern. And maybe, just maybe, the ocean hides not only places and creatures, but choices. If another civilization has endured there, then remaining hidden may be their greatest achievement. They may have chosen silence over revelation, invisibility over conflict. We assume discovery is inevitable, but what if concealment is the truest form of survival? We know how much can be kept hidden when the environment itself works as a shield. Pressure, darkness, and distance form barriers stronger than walls. No satellite can see through kilometers of water. No telescope can pierce it. The ocean is the perfect vault, storing secrets beyond our reach. Consider how we approach it. We send submersibles down for minutes, perhaps hours, and call it exploration. We map ridges in broad strokes and call it knowledge. In reality, we have glimpsed only the shallowest fraction. The rest remains sealed, waiting, or perhaps deliberately avoiding us. The ocean hides its rhythms too. We think of it as chaotic, but in truth it follows deep patterns. Tides, currents, migrations, all linked to forces of moon, sun, and earth. For those who know how to read them, the ocean is full of signals. Perhaps another people reads those signals with the ease we read clocks. To us, hidden order, to them, daily life. Then there is the psychological hiding. The sea reflects our fears. We project monsters into it, leviathans and krakens, because we can't see clearly. It becomes a mirror for the unknown. But what if those fears are not empty projections? What if they are subconscious recognition that the sea does indeed keep more than fish and salt? Our technology hides things in it as well. Waste dumped, cables stretched, machines sunk. The sea swallows it all, erasing traces quickly. What we forget on land, the sea remembers silently. It may already hold the true archive of humanity, far more complete than our libraries, scattered across wrecks and drowned coasts. And what about communication itself? Perhaps the sea keeps hidden signals, not because they are weak, but because they are not meant for us. Perhaps messages flow constantly through sound and current, unnoticed because we lack the senses to hear them. The ocean could be alive with dialogue while we assume it is mute. If so, then the greatest secret it keeps is perspective. Our view of the world is incomplete, partial, land-centered. The ocean's view would be different, whole, immersive, shaped by pressure and flow. To glimpse it would be to realize how small our knowledge is. All of this leads to the thought that what the ocean hides may not remain hidden forever. Currents shift, technology advances, accidents happen. Sooner or later, something will surface. The question is whether we are ready for what we might find. Whether our psychology, our culture, our science can handle the weight of revelation. And if it does happen, we may discover that what has been hidden is not simply history or biology, but presence. A civilization watching, surviving, thriving, waiting beneath the waves. And that possibility carries us naturally into the next question. If they are there, hidden, what if they are watching us already, not as legend or dream, but as neighbors we have never acknowledged? The idea that they might be watching us from below is both unsettling and strangely comforting. Unsettling because it means our lives are not as private or isolated as we imagine. Comforting because it suggests that we are not alone, that our story has always had witnesses. But what would it mean if an underwater civilization has observed us quietly, patiently from the deep? First, we should think about what they would actually see from below. Our world must look noisy, bright, and chaotic. Ships carve across the surface, their engines echoing through the water, sonar blasts, submarine drills, seismic surveys, all of it shakes their environment. To us, it's infrastructure, commerce, science. To them, it must sound like constant thunder. If they are listening, then they know we exist, and they know we are restless. Light is another signal. Cities along coastlines shine so brightly they are visible from orbit. From beneath the sea, those same lights must appear as faint glows on the horizon, artificial dawns that never end. Fishing boats scatter illumination across the surface. Tankers glow as they pass. Ports shimmer like artificial stars. If they are watching, they have seen our rise from torches to neon, from darkness to constant glare. They might also watch the way we change the sea itself. Pollution drifting down, plastic fragments settling in trenches, oil slicks spreading across waves. If they keep records, then the history of us is probably not flattering. They would see a species that treats the ocean as both a resource and dumping ground, taking from it while returning waste. From their perspective, we are reckless neighbors. But maybe they see more than harm. Maybe they notice our curiosity, the way we send probes, build submarines, dive again and again despite the danger. They might see persistence in that, a restless hunger to understand. Perhaps they even admire it, even if they don't trust it. If they are watching, the question becomes why they remain hidden. One answer is self-preservation. Human history shows what happens when one culture encounters another with a technological advantage: conquest, exploitation, collapse. Perhaps they have no desire to become a case study in our textbooks. Better to watch from shadows, to know us without revealing themselves. Another answer could be patience. If their sense of time is slower, they might not see urgency in revealing themselves. They could be waiting until we are ready, until we've matured past the stage of conflict and waste. To us, centuries feel long. To them, centuries may be nothing. But watching doesn't have to mean passivity. They could be influencing us subtly. Myths of sea gods demanding respect, warnings against arrogance at sea, stories of punishments for overfishing or pollution. These might be more than moral tales. Perhaps they were seeded by encounters, reminders passed down until they became legend. In that sense, watching us from below could also mean guiding us quietly, nudging us toward caution without direct interference. It's also possible they study us the way we study whales or birds, curious but cautious. They might track our migrations, note our patterns, record our songs. What we see as culture, they might see as behavior to analyze. What we see as history, they might see as data. Think about how often strange reports surface. Lights under the water, shadows following ships, figures glimpsed by divers. We dismiss them as imagination or error. But what if they are moments of surveillance? Brief exposures when the watchers are closer than they intended to be. If they are there, their presence might already be in our stories, just unrecognized for what it is. Psychologically, the idea of being watched forces reflection. If someone else sees us, how would we appear in their eyes? Would they see our wars as foolish, our technology as clumsy, our culture as shallow, or would they see resilience, creativity, the drive to survive against odds? Being observed means being judged, and that judgment could be humbling. There is also the question of whether they intervene. Watching might not always mean distance. Perhaps they have interfered subtly at times, saving sailors, steering storms, influencing migrations. Myths of miraculous rescues or punishments from the sea could be echoes of such interventions. From their perspective, this might not be interference, but maintenance, like gardeners tending a shared space. And if they watch, then they know us better than we know them. That imbalance matters. They could understand our strengths and weaknesses, our fears and desires, while we know almost nothing of theirs. Such asymmetry would make any future contact deeply uneven. They would arrive at the table prepared, while we would stumble in blind. But being watched is not always sinister. Parents watch children not only to judge, but to protect. Scientists watch ecosystems not only to study, but to preserve. Perhaps their watch is protective. A decision to let us grow without interference, stepping in only if we threaten the balance beyond repair. Of course, another possibility exists, that we are mistaken, and they are not watching at all. Perhaps they have no interest in us, seeing us as irrelevant as ants scurrying on land. Our importance may be smaller than we imagine. The universe does not revolve around us, neither might the ocean. Yet even that possibility carries weight. Whether they watch us with curiosity, caution, or indifference, the thought alone reminds us that we are not the only possible center of intelligence on Earth. It forces humility, and humility is valuable. And if they are watching, then the final question becomes unavoidable. What happens if they decide to reveal themselves? What would change if the watchers stepped into view, and humanity realized it had never been alone? The idea of meeting another civilization beneath our own seas is so staggering that it's hard to imagine the world staying the same afterward. Every part of human life would feel the shock. History, science, politics, religion, even the way we think of ourselves when we look in the mirror. To ask whether meeting them would change humanity forever is less a question of if, and more a question of how deep the change would run. First, consider history. For centuries, we've told ourselves a story of being the only advanced species on Earth. Every empire, every invention, every war has been framed within that assumption. If we discovered that another civilization has lived beside us all along, our histories would feel incomplete, perhaps even false. Textbooks would have to be rewritten, timelines redrawn. We would realize that our story was never singular, that we were never alone. Then science. Entire disciplines would be shaken. Biology would have to account for intelligent life thriving in an environment we once considered inhospitable. Anthropology would have to redefine its scope, no longer limited to land-based humans and their cultures. Physics, chemistry, engineering, all would be tested by the technologies or adaptations that allowed survival in the abyss. The discovery would not just add to science, it would challenge its foundations, forcing us to admit that we missed something fundamental in our own backyard. Politics might feel the shock most immediately. Nations fight over land, resources, and oceans already. If a hidden people were revealed, the question of sovereignty would erupt. Whose waters are they in? Do they belong to themselves, or do land nations claim jurisdiction? Treaties would be rewritten, militaries mobilized, diplomats scrambling to interpret the meaning of this new presence. Some governments might see opportunity, others threat, others wonder. Religion would not be untouched. For traditions that see humanity as unique, chosen, or central, the discovery of another civilization on Earth would be destabilizing. New interpretations would arise, some rejecting, others embracing the new reality. Myths of gods of the sea might suddenly feel more literal. Prophecies re-examined, texts reread. For many believers, it could be proof of divine diversity, that creation is larger than we imagined. For others, it could be heresy, a challenge to authority. But beyond institutions, there is the personal change. Imagine waking up one morning, knowing that neighbors have always lived below, watching from the deep. The idea alone would shift how we see ourselves. Arrogance might falter, humility might grow, or the opposite, fear, suspicion, hostility. Psychology would ripple with the discovery. Art would transform too. Artists have always drawn on myth, imagination, and discovery. Meeting another civilization would flood culture with inspiration. Films, novels, music, paintings, all would surge to interpret the event. Some would idealize, some would warn, but all would reflect the new awareness that Earth is shared more deeply than we thought. Technology could leap forward. If they possess knowledge of surviving under pressure, of cultivating light, of generating energy without fire, humanity could learn from it. The exchange could accelerate our understanding of sustainability, offering answers to problems we struggle with. But there is also danger. Technologies can be misused. What they offer as survival tools we might twist into weapons. History shows we're not always responsible with gifts. Culturally, the meeting would test us. Difference has always been a source of conflict among humans themselves. Race, language, religion, borders, all have divided us. If we cannot always accept each other, how would we accept those so profoundly different? Some might see them as kin, others as threat, others as prey. The choice would reveal who we are as much as who they are. Yet there is potential for unity too. Humanity has always struggled to see itself as one species. Perhaps meeting another would finally give us that perspective. The way astronauts speak of the overview effect, seeing Earth as a fragile whole from space. Perhaps contact from below would give us a similar awakening. One planet, two civilizations, both vulnerable, both needing each other to survive. The change would also reach into ethics. How should we treat them? As equals, as subjects of study, as threats? How should they treat us? What rights do they hold? What obligations? Entire fields of philosophy would wrestle with these questions. Morality would be tested in new ways, beyond human to human, stretching to human to other. The discovery could even alter how we think of possibility itself. For centuries, we've looked outward, dreaming of life on other planets. If life more advanced than we imagined exists beneath our oceans, then the universe suddenly feels far more crowded. We would look at Europa, Enceladus, Titan, with new eyes. If the abyss holds intelligence here, why not there? Education would change. Children would grow up learning not only about continents and nations, but about neighbors in the deep. Their sense of the world would be broader from the start. Maps would be redrawn, not just with land and sea, but with civilizations above and below. Identity itself would stretch, but not all change would be hopeful. Fear could dominate. Mistrust could lead to conflict. Militaries might prepare for war. Corporations might rush to exploit. Governments might censor or control. Conspiracy theories would spread. Paranoia could poison relations before dialogue even begins. Still, history shows that encounters, however messy, reshape us. When we met other cultures across oceans, humanity changed forever, sometimes for worse, sometimes for better, but always profoundly. Meeting another civilization beneath the waves would be no different. It would be a turning point, a before and after moment. Whether the changes bring growth or collapse would depend on choices, humility or arrogance, cooperation or conquest, patience or haste. The ocean itself might become a mirror, showing us who we are by how we respond. And perhaps that is the deepest change of all. Meeting them would not only reveal another civilization, it would reveal ourselves, stripped of excuses, confronted with the reality that we are not alone and never were. And from there the story would continue, not as an ending, but as a beginning. Two civilizations learning to share one planet, one ocean, one fragile home. Returning to the surface is not only a physical act, it's also a shift in perspective. After drifting for so long through questions of hidden civilizations, glowing cities, pressure and darkness, food and survival, psychology and time, we have to reorient ourselves again to the world we know. The air feels different when you've been imagining the weight of the sea pressing constantly. Light feels sharper when you've pictured endless dark. The sounds of daily life, engines, voices, footsteps feel louder when you've been thinking about vibrations moving through silence. Coming back to the surface reminds us of how ordinary things are, and how extraordinary they look when contrasted with what might lie below. The surface is where we've always lived, where our civilizations rose, where our stories began. We measure our history in land empires, in deserts crossed, in mountains climbed, yet all that time the ocean has been here too, covering most of the planet, shaping climate, feeding us, hiding secrets. To return to the surface with the thought of another civilization below is to see land differently. It feels smaller, less absolute. Our continents look like islands in a wider sea, our cities like fragile settlements perched on the edge of something vast. Imagine looking out at the horizon after considering all this. Waves stretching endlessly, light glittering across them, ships cutting lines across the surface. For most of us, that sight is familiar, even comforting. But now imagine it layered with another thought, that beneath those same waves could be watchers, neighbors, builders, thinkers, perhaps as ancient as the first myths that named them. Suddenly the horizon feels alive, not empty. The sea feels like a presence, not just a setting. Returning to the surface also means thinking about what we've carried back. Every dive, whether real or imagined, changes perspective. Divers often talk about how the ocean alters their sense of scale, how seeing vastness and life in strange forms makes daily problems feel smaller. Astronauts say something similar about space, describing the overview effect when they see Earth from orbit. Our journey downward has its own version of that. After spending time imagining civilizations in the abyss, coming back to the surface makes us see our own world with fresh eyes. We see how fragile our systems are. We rely on sunlight, on crops, on predictable rhythms. An underwater civilization might rely on currents, vents, and patience. Both systems are delicate. Both demand balance. If anything, returning to the surface makes it clear how much we share with them, even if they remain myth. Survival is always about adaptation, about finding harmony with the environment, about building culture in the spaces allowed. There's also the matter of humility. On the surface, we feel dominant. Skyscrapers, satellites, airplanes, all symbols of mastery. Beneath the sea, all that mastery vanishes. Pressure and dark remind us that our control is limited. Returning to the surface after imagining the hidden world strips some of our arrogance. It leaves us with awe instead. And awe is valuable. Awe is what drives curiosity, creativity, respect. It's what makes us treat the unknown not as something to conquer, but as something to learn from. If there are neighbors below, awe would be the right posture to meet them with. If there are not, awe still teaches us to treat the ocean itself with reverence, as the vast and living system it is. Coming back also brings us to the question of story. We've wandered through myths, possibilities, adaptations, architectures, psychologies. Stories are the way humans make sense of what they cannot yet prove. Whether or not an underwater civilization exists, the fact that we keep imagining it tells us something. It tells us that we crave mystery, that we sense incompleteness in our picture of the world, that we know instinctively there is more than what meets the eye. The surface is where those stories get told, where they're passed on, written down, shared around fires or on screens. Returning to it reminds us that storytelling is itself a survival tool. It prepares us for possibilities. It lets us imagine what we might otherwise ignore. In that sense, the myths of Atlantis, the legends of drowned kingdoms, the whispers of glowing cities are not frivolous. They are rehearsals. They are humanity's way of training itself to be ready for discovery. And discovery may come, perhaps not in the form of a grand city revealed, but in the slow accumulation of evidence. New sonar maps, unexplained ruins, unfamiliar species, strange sounds. Piece by piece, the hidden becomes less hidden. Returning to the surface with that possibility in mind changes how we look at exploration. It feels less like conquering space and more like meeting neighbors. But returning is not only about knowledge, it's also about responsibility. If the ocean does keep secrets, if it does hold life we haven't acknowledged, then our choices matter. Pollution, climate change, overfishing, these aren't abstract problems. They're actions that ripple downward into places we cannot see. If there are others living below, those choices affect them too. Even if there aren't, the ocean itself is a living system deserving of care. Coming back to the surface with the memory of the depth should remind us of that responsibility. And then there's the personal level. Each of us returning from a journey of imagination like this has to decide what it means. Do we treat the possibility of underwater civilizations as fantasy, shrugging it off, or do we let it expand our sense of wonder? Do we walk to the shoreline and see only water, or do we see mystery? Returning to the surface gives us the choice of perspective. The truth is, whether or not the first civilization still lives underwater, the value of the question is real. It forces us to think about adaptation, about survival, about humility, about how we treat the unknown. Those lessons remain even if the civilization is only in myth. And if it is more than myth, if it is real, then returning to the surface now prepares us for the day when the truth is revealed. So here we are, back at the edge of land, looking out at the horizon. The sea is the same as it was before, but we are not. The dive into imagination has left its mark, and when the waves roll in, they carry with them the quiet reminder that the ocean is never empty, that it always holds more than we see, and that our story may still have companions we have not yet met. Perhaps one day we will dive again, not in imagination, but in truth. Perhaps we will find ruins that glow in the dark, cities that pulse with life, people who move through water as we move through air. Perhaps we will learn their songs, share their silence, grow to understand their patient way of being. Perhaps we will discover that the sea has always been speaking, and we have only just learned to listen. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the ocean will keep its secrets, and we will keep our wonder. Perhaps the mystery itself is the gift, the reminder that no matter how much we think we know, there is always more waiting just beyond our reach. Either way, the ocean endures. It breathes with the tides. It dreams in the deep. It holds space for possibilities we cannot yet name. And as long as we stand on its shores, as long as we peer into its darkness and feel that familiar pull of the unknown, the question will remain alive. What if they're down there still? The first ones, the hidden ones, the people of the silent blue? What if they've been waiting all along? Not for us to find them, but for us to understand that finding isn't always necessary. That some neighbors are best left undisturbed, some mysteries best left unsolved, some stories best left unfinished. The ocean knows. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The waves roll in. They roll out, carrying with them fragments of foam and salt, and something else too, something that feels like memory, like promise, like the echo of a song we almost recognize but can never quite place. And in that echo lies the truth we've been circling all along. We are not alone, whether we ever meet them or not. The vastness that surrounds us is alive, is watching, is dreaming its own dreams of what lies above the surface. And in that mutuality of wonder, in that shared sense of mystery looking across the boundary between water and air, perhaps we find something more valuable than contact. Perhaps we find connection. And so the story continues, not with answers, but with better questions, not with certainty, but with awe, not with an ending, but with the endless beginning that is wonder itself, rolling in with each wave, rolling out with each tide, eternal as the sea that carries it. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the silent blue. Until we meet again, keep listening to the waves. You never know what stories they might carry, or what secrets they might whisper when you learn to hear them right.